Chapter 942. Do you expect them to help you? Dean sneered as he saw the ape instructor's expression. He suddenly flew out and shot out his sharp blades like a storm. The ape instructor narrowed his eyes. His burly body was as light as a fallen leaf. He dodged or pushed away the sharp blades. He made up his mind that as long as his two companions defeated Zaxi and the others, they would come to reinforce him. Dean's attacks were getting faster and faster. His sharp blades became flexible and changeable. He had the upper hand and completely suppressed the ape instructor. Whoosh! A sharp blade suddenly changed direction. The ape instructor had no time to dodge. His arm was cut and blood spurted out. The ape instructor's expression changed slightly. He felt that his body's functions were getting slower and slower. He retreated, feeling annoyed. At the same time, he glanced at the battlefield from the corner of his eyes. He saw that his two companions had already forced Zaxi and Jason to retreat, barely holding on. Whoosh! A sharp blade flew towards him, slicing towards his cheek. The ape instructor's pupils shrank as he tried to dodge. But the blade suddenly changed direction and moved towards his throat. His face suddenly changed. He took a few steps to open the distance again. But his back was full of cold sweat. Dean didn't wait for him to stop, but he still chased after him. The ape instructor hastily parried and retreated. Dean attacked more and more fiercely. He felt that his movements were getting smoother and smoother. He didn't feel tired at all. His sharp limbs were like his hands and feet. They could bend, change direction, fall off or twist at will. His attacks also became more and more tricky and unpredictable. It was as if there was wind supporting his body, making him graceful and light. I can be faster. Dean's eyes were full of inexplicable excitement as he attacked faster and faster. Puff, puff. The two sharp blades abruptly changed their direction and instantly closed in on the instructor's abdomen and thighs, leaving two bloody marks on them. The drill master roared and his hair stood up. His rough palms swung forward, and with a snap sound, he caught the two blades in front of Dean's chest. He lifted them up and pulled them out. Dean didn't retreat. Instead, he rushed towards him at a faster speed. His hands were like a peacock's tail. His fingers were like hooks as he grabbed the ape instructor's chest and pulled the distance between them closer. The instructor's face changed. He raised his hand to tear Dean's face, trying to force him back. But the tip of Dean's nose suddenly grew, and a black demonic substance protruded along the tip of his nose, turning into a sharp blade. He didn't flinch and directly collided with it. Puff! The sharp blade pierced the drill master's palm. Dean reached out and hugged the drill master's waist. His cold cheeks were infinitely close. No! The gorilla instructor screamed in horror, but all he saw was Dean's emotionless eyes. The next moment, severe pain came from all over his body. He was completely hugged by Dean. Dean's sharp blades wrapped around him like a clamshell. The sharp blades penetrated the drill master's body from the side. The gorilla instructor's struggling body also froze in an instant. His eyes widened, and saliva flowed out of his mouth. Never would he have thought that he would actually fall into the hands of a lower abyss. Whoosh! Dean loosened his hands and retreated a few steps. He pulled out the sharp blade that was pierced into the drill master's body. Blood gushed out from the wound. The drill master's knees softened, and then his body slowly fell down. There was no trace of breath. Dean's tense heart also relaxed. Suddenly he felt a burst of exhaustion from the roots of the sharp blades. He looked up at the battlefield in the distance. Zaxi and Jason were covered in wounds. They were in constant danger. It was estimated that they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. I left you there because I thought that I would have to rely on you. I didn't expect that I would solve it myself. Dean murmured. He raised his tail and cut off the drill master's head. As a result, there was no possibility for the drill master to disguise himself. He turned around, stomped his feet, and flew towards Zha Shite and the others. Ah! One of the officers with small eyes suddenly sensed something. His face changed. How is it possible? Another young officer was surprised. He avoided Jason and turned his head. He saw Dean and the drill master, who was lying on the ground not far behind him. The drill master's head was cut off. He blinked as he suspected that he was hallucinating. But Dean was a few hundred meters away from the battlefield. The strong wind made them come back to their senses. They were shocked and angry at the same time. They immediately surrounded Dean from the left and right. Dean's toes touched the ground. His body suddenly rotated like a top. His sharp blades protruded out like wind and fire wheels. Bang! He collided with the officer with small eyes who was rushing towards him from the right. Puff! The chest of the officer with small eyes was hit by Dean. His body was instantly torn into pieces. The young officer on the left was stunned. He looked at the scene in horror. His face was full of disbelief. But the shock lasted for less than half a second. He turned around and fled. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, he had caught up with the young officer. He threw out his sword and pierced through the officer's back without any hindrance. The sword came out of the chest and was lifted up. In an instant, the blood of the young officer's upper body was divided into two. Instant kill. Blood splashed on Dean's body. He slowly turned around and walked towards Jason and Zaxite. Jason and Zaxi stood in the same place. All of this happened too fast. From the time Dean rushed over to the time he killed two officers, it took less than 5 seconds. It was almost a crushing kill. At this time, both of them suddenly thought of something. They turned around and saw the drill master's body hundreds of meters away. His head had been removed. Dead? The two of them widened their eyes in astonishment. Dean killed a middle-level, abyss-level drill master? How was that possible? Zaxite instinctively took a step back as he saw Dean approach. Are you also a middle-level abyss-level? Dean indifferently said as he saw the fear in Zaxite's eyes. If I was, then the battle would have been over. It was just a fluke. Was there a fluke in a battle against an experienced drill master? The answer was obviously no. Zaxite didn't dare to ask again. He knew that everyone had their own secret. He reluctantly smiled, but he felt bitter in his mouth. Jason also had a bit of fear in his heart, but he hid it deeply. He knew that Dean wouldn't do anything to them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be too late to let them be killed by the two officers. Let's find a place to take refuge. Dean pulled their thoughts back. Zaxite responded, Yes, we shouldn't stay here for a long time. We should go into the forest and observe the situation before considering how to move forward. What do you think? Dean nodded slightly. He put away his demonic body and said, Lead the way. Zaxit and Jason also retracted their demonic bodies. Zaxit and 2 other seriously injured pioneers led the way. As for the others, they were all beheaded by the 2 officers. Now there were only 4 of them left, plus Dean and Aisha, a total of 6 pioneers. Boom! When they stepped into the forest, they suddenly heard a loud roar coming from afar. The few of them stopped and looked over. Immediately, they saw a blazing flame burning at the stronghold, like a volcanic eruption. Dudian immediately jumped to the top of a nearby giant tree and looked at it. He saw a faint red figure of 7 or 8 meters high in the flames above the fortress. The figure looked like a human, but also like a reptile. It had ox-like horns on its head and a very long tail behind it. It was burning with flames and swinging like a fire whip. At first glance, it looked a bit like Haisha's demonic half-dragon image. Is this a fire dragon? Dean's eyes slightly moved. At this moment, Jason and Zaxi also looked at the top of a giant tree nearby. After seeing the situation on the fortress clearly, Zaxi let out a low cry. It's the fire dragon alien tribe. As expected, it's them who led the magical beast army to attack the war god wall. Jason, who was at the side, asked curiously, This is a fire dragon? Have you seen it before? I was lucky to see it once, but it was dead. The flames on its body won't extinguish after death. It is said that it will be dead for more than 3 years before it returns to normal. Zaxite's eyes were dignified. Once the flames on its body are touched, it is almost impossible to extinguish. The only way is to erase the place that is touched. If the hand is touched, then cut off your hand. This is the fastest way to save your life. Otherwise, the flames will continue to burn along your hand until you turn into ashes. Jason was shocked. Is it that exaggerated? Can't water extinguish it? Of course. Zaxite's voice was low. This isn't an ordinary flame. Have you seen an oil fire? The more water is poured, the faster the fire spreads. Although it isn't an oil fire, but it is more special. The only way to extinguish it is to completely wrap the fire with a wet cloth. Jason raised his eyebrows. It isn't that terrible. We can just jump into the water. Zaxite wryly smiled. It's easy to say, but there is no pool for you to jump into during the battle. Generally speaking, fire dragons don't appear in places with water. They can only be seen in bare wastelands, piles of rocks, and other places. How do you know? Jason looked at him in surprise. I heard it from a veteran. Zaxite sighed. Dean looked at the fire dragon on the fortress. He saw that the fire dragon was running amok in the encirclement of the regular army. The fire dragon's body touched the soldiers and ignited them. Everywhere it went was a sea of fire. Dean suddenly had an idea as he looked at its crazy attack and roar. Why was it so desperate to climb over the God of War's wall? From Zaxite's words and the behavior of the fire dragon, it was completely in line with the characteristics of an intelligent creature. Although it may not reach the same level of intelligence as humans, but it was by no means an ordinary monster. Why are the aliens outside the God of War's wall attacking the God of War's wall? This idea grew in Dean's mind. He slightly frowned and turned to look at the God of War's wall in front of him. It was towering and straight into the clouds. Such a giant wall isolated the kingdom of God and the giant wall. It also isolated the aura of humans. In that case, why did these aliens try to climb over this wall? Was it because they couldn't go down in the God of War's wall? Or was there something inside the wall that they longed for? Or did they also want to go out? Rumble. At this time, a vibration came from the edge of the forest. The few of them turned around and saw a black horde of beasts slowly advancing towards the stronghold. Zaxite's face changed as he said to Dean, "The scale of this group of monsters is too big. Moreover, there are fire dragons involved. The fortress will definitely not be able to hold. They will probably retreat to the God of War's wall. We should also find a place to hide so as not to encounter the stragglers." Dean nodded. At this point, he could only continue to hide. If they returned to the fortress at this time, they would be sent to the front line. Even if they mixed with the regular army and returned to the God of War's wall, they would be pulled out. After all, the Imperial border guards had been fighting for many years. They were very good at preventing deserters. "Let's retreat first," Dean said. Seeing his order, Zaxite and Jason immediately took the 2 wounded pioneers and moved forward along the forest. There were some crawling monsters in this forest. Their physique wasn't high. Generally, they were at the level of hunter or limitless. This place was close to the God of War's wall. It was usually cleaned, so there were no large monsters entrenched here. Zaxi and Jason's determination to survive was getting stronger and stronger as they walked through the forest. They used to think that the outside of the giant wall was as terrible as what the army had said. Now they found out that there were low-level monsters in the area. Not all areas had the chance to encounter other races. On the way, the roars and shouts from the fortress were getting farther and farther away. Zaxite and Jason led the team in front. They waited until the sounds of killing gradually disappeared before they slowly stopped moving forward. They found a place to rest, eat and drink, and then continued to move forward. "Let's sleep here tonight." Jason looked at the 2 seriously injured pioneers. They had suffered a lot along the way, but they were sensible enough not to say anything about taking a rest. Most of them were afraid that Dean and others would abandon them as burdens, so they endured the pain and followed the pioneers. Zaxite saw that there were no large monsters around. He nodded. The environment is good. Dean, what do you think? Dean shook his head. Sooner or later, the battle in the fortress will be decided. The possibility of the aliens being defeated is very high. Once they are defeated, the monsters will flee in all directions. It is very likely that they will bump into us. It makes sense. This place is too close to the God of War's wall. Zaxite agreed with Dean's idea. Jason hesitated, but it is too far away. We can't see the situation of the battlefield. When will we return? Do we really have to stay here for a lifetime? Just the few of us? Hearing this, Zaxite immediately frowned, and the two injured pioneers became silent. Chapter 943. Okay. Jason reluctantly agreed. He didn't want to defect and wander outside the wall for the rest of his life. But the battlefield was chaotic, and he was likely to be sacrificed if he went back. He could only temporarily avoid the battlefield. The decision was made. Everyone was led by Dean and moved forward. Half a day later, they left the forest and came to a tall mountain. The mountain was 200 to 300 meters tall, and there were many monsters living there. The lord of this place was a reptilian monster that looked like a crouching spider, but its legs were sharp blades. Its strength was comparable to a ruler, and it was killed by Zaxi with 2 slashes. They occupied the mountain and rested here. From the top of the mountain, they could vaguely see the scenery outside the giant wall more than 20 miles away. They could also see the scene behind the beast tide. From time to time, there would be loud and majestic beast roars coming from the black beast tide. It seemed to be in order. The aftermath of the beast tide could be faintly felt even from more than 20 miles away. Zaxit and Jason's eyesight wasn't weak. Although they couldn't see the shape of the monsters in the beast tide, but they could see the scale of the beast tide. Was the scale of the beast tide so big before? Jason was shocked as he turned to Zaxit and asked. Zaxit was startled. Don't ask me. Although I came earlier than you, but I haven't really been to the battlefield. But it should be on a similar scale. No wonder they recruited unaffiliated people like us at the last minute. The battle has been going on for 5 to 6 hours since dawn. Not counting the magical beasts that have already invaded the fortress, there should be about 50 to 60,000 of them in this area, right? I guess so. Jason was not sure. I can't see the end. Fortunately, we ran out in advance. If we listened to that grandson and defended the fortress, we wouldn't be able to survive even if we had 10 lives. It's too horrible. Although we have seen a lot of beast tides in the giant wall, the monsters were generally weak. The human wave tactic was useless in front of us. However, there are big guys here. There are so many pioneers. Even if we were surrounded by the beasts in the upper abyss, we would still lose a layer of skin. Dean's eyes were dignified, and he was equally surprised. The battle had lasted for 5 or 6 hours, but the scale of the beast horde was still so huge. Most likely, the fortress had already been captured. He didn't know whether the indestructible wall of war could defend against this invasion. Look, it's the fire dragon race. Zaxit suddenly raised his finger. The few of them looked in the direction of his finger and immediately saw streaks of fiery light appear in the black tide behind the horde of beasts. They swept past the horde of beasts like meteors. The scarlet color formed a sharp contrast with the pitch-black horde of beasts. They moved quickly, as if they were leaping through the horde of beasts. They quickly moved from the back of the horde of beasts to the front of the horde of beasts until they disappeared from everyone's sight. 28, 29. Jason's lips slightly moved. When he counted to 33, he took a deep breath. 33. Dean's eyes flashed, but he didn't speak. Suddenly, an idea appeared in his mind. This idea made him feel that it was too bold, and even rebellious. He knew from Felicia that the fighting strength of the fire dragons was not inferior to that of the trolls. The adult trolls had the power of the abyss, and some of them were even stronger than the middle abyss. The same was true for the fire dragons. Felicia had taught Dean the way to judge the strength of the fire dragons, and that was to look at the color of their flames. The fire dragon race with blue flames was the weakest infant. Its combat power was lower than the abyss. The fire dragon race with red flames was comparable to the lower abyss. The fire dragon race with golden flames belonged to the royal family of the fire dragon race. Its strength was close to the upper abyss. Only the Lord of the Abyss could barely deal with the golden flames of the fire dragon race. Felicia also said that the fire dragons were the most powerful of the fire dragons. Their flames were snow-white and looked like steam. They were the kings of the fire dragons, and only the 7 kings could kill them. The previous 33 fire dragons had red flames. 2 of them had a trace of gold in them. Such combat power was enough to defeat the 3 border guards who brought Dean. However, the 3 border guards relied on the natural protection of the Wall of War. It wasn't difficult for them to block more than 30 fire dragons. I heard that the strength of the fire dragons is related to the strength of their flames. Zaxit started to talk about the fire dragon's strength, according to the color of the flames. Jason and the other 2 listened attentively, and after listening, their eyes widened. Doesn't it mean that there are more than 30 abyss? Jason was dumbfounded. When did the abyss become so common? It must be known that the Lord of the Wall was the abyss. But there were more than 30 abyss in the battlefield. Moreover, they didn't pay attention to the battlefield. Who knew if there were more fire dragons in the past? Was this the world outside the Wall of War? Jason, Zaxit, and the others were in a heavy mood. They were proud of their strength, but they could only rely on luck to survive here. Even if they hid in the area where the monsters were generally weaker, the powerful monsters could move and come out to look for food. If they happened to bump into them, then wouldn't they become food? They were still young and could live for a long time. There were 365 days and 8,760 hours in a year. If measured in hours, their lives were too long. Even 8,000 hours in a year where they lived in constant fear was enough to drive them crazy, not to mention 10 or 50 years. For a time, even the determined Zaxit couldn't help but want to retreat. He suddenly regretted his decision and even felt that it was a bit reckless. No one spoke. The mountain was silent. The atmosphere was gloomy. The beast tide was still moving in the distance. From the changes in the color of the beast tide, it could be seen that different monsters were continuously coming from the rear. It seemed that there was no end to them. After watching for a long time, Zaxit suddenly said, "Do you think that the Wall of War has been broken?" Dean's eyes moved, but he remained silent. Jason and the other 2 pioneers were astonished. Jason said in astonishment, "It can't be, right? The Battle God Wall has protected the Empire for so many years and is an absolute defensive divine wall constructed by the gods. How could it be broken through?" Zaxit said in a low voice, "It didn't happen before, but it doesn't mean it will never happen. There is no absolute defense in this world." Jason could only admit this. He smiled bitterly. "Are we the bane of the world? The empire that stood tall collapsed when we arrived? I don't believe it. If it didn't fall, then how could the beast tide keep moving forward? Is the consumption rate of the battlefield so fast?" Zaxit frowned. His suspicions were well-founded. Jason naturally knew this point. Although he had some doubts in his heart, he still didn't want to believe that the Wall of War could be broken. He said, "It is estimated that there is a big shot on the Wall of War. Or there was originally a big shot there. In any case, I think the possibility of the Wall of War being broken is too low. The Empire has been established for so many years, and the Wall of War has been guarding for at least 200 years. I don't believe that it will fall today." Zaxit looked at Dean. "How about we go back and see?" Dean looked at Jason and Zaxit. He saw that they were waiting for him to make a decision. He didn't answer Zaxit's words but asked, "Do you want the wall of war to collapse or not?" Zaxit and Jason were surprised. Zaxit hesitated for a moment and said, "From our current position, I hope that there will be a problem with the wall of war. Then maybe we can sneak in and follow behind the aliens." Jason glanced at him but didn't say anything, remaining silent. Dean looked at Jason. "You don't want it to collapse?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know. I hope that the wall of war will collapse because of the same reason as Zaxit. We can sneak in, but I don't want it to collapse. Once there is no protection of the wall, then the people inside the wall will be plunged into misery and suffering." He wanted to say something but held back. Dean simply said, "I hope that it will collapse. At least we can live. But it is a bit rebellious. We are deserters. Whether it is according to the military law or the law of the Empire, we will be executed countless times. I am not afraid of you listening to me. This is my true opinion." Zaxit nodded, indeed, although it is a bit scary to say such words here, but there is no one else here. "Since you have such thoughts, then I think we can help the aliens," Dean immediately said. Zaxit and Jason were stunned as they looked at Dean. "Help the aliens? You mean? We can help if the aliens have the hope to break through the God of War's wall. We will have the opportunity to steal back the God of War's wall. Anyway, the 7 kings will get the news and come over to repair the wall. We can kill the aliens while we are at it," Dudian said. Jason hesitated. This isn't good. If they know about it, I think it is okay." The cultured and refined Zaxite was very decisive. Dudi is right. When the battle god wall is broken, the 7 kings will naturally rush over as reinforcements. If they make a move, these invading alien races will definitely be wiped out, and there won't be many casualties. Anyway, there isn't any god wall near the border. These invading alien races might even fight with the monsters inside the wall. Jason saw that Zaxit and Dean had the same opinion. He knew that there was no way to change it. He thought for a moment, "But we are weak. How can we help the aliens? Wouldn't they be more effective than us if they sent out a few fire dragons?" Zaxite's reaction was very fast. He coldly smiled and said, "That might not be the case. The ones who understand humans the most are humans. We are familiar with the situation on the battle god wall. The alien races only know how to kill, but we can lead them to attack the weak points." Dean nodded. "It is the simplest way to kill with a borrowed knife." Jason sighed. "That's true." They discussed the details, and then under Dean's suggestion, they stayed on the mountain for a few hours to watch the battle. The sky gradually darkened. It was dusk and the clouds of fire covered the sky. The number of beasts had become sparse. From time to time there were fire dragons rushing out from the beasts towards the front of the battlefield. In the evening, Dean, Jason and Tashi ate dry food and groped their way back. They were dozens of miles away from the Wall of War by the early morning. They could see the huge outline of the Wall of War. They saw the flames of war raging in the 7th area of the Wall of War. Flames were splashing on the towering Wall of War. The roars of beasts and shouts of killing seemed to be coming from the sky. It was extremely shocking. Dean, Jason, Zaxit and others were surprised and sighed when they saw this scene. They were surprised that the beasts had continued to attack for so long. Moreover, the regular army on the Wall of War was able to hold on for so long. They sighed because the wall outside the Wall of War was stained with blood. It was as if there was a waterfall of blood pouring down from the highest point. More than 3,000 meters of the Wall of War was bathed in blood. On the ground outside the Wall of War, the corpses of the beasts were piled up like a mountain. There were tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of corpses. They formed a steep slope. The beasts from behind climbed up the slope of the corpses towards the top of the wall or jumped up. However, from time to time, boulders would roll down from the wall and gunpowder shells would be thrown to kill the beasts climbing the wall. Every time the shells exploded, the entire Wall of War seemed to tremble. Fortunately, the shells were far away from the Wall of War, and didn't explode on the wall. The aftermath of the shells burned black marks on the wall. Dean, Jason, and others didn't expect that the wall of war wasn't broken. They didn't even see the hope of breaking it. Dean frowned and stared at the wall in silence. Half an hour later, the battlefield was still filled with waves of charging and stubborn defense. The corpses of the demonic creatures fell from the war god wall like raindrops, raising the height of the slope by another 10 to 20 meters. They actually held on. Zaxit's face was ugly as he gritted his teeth. Jason was silent. No one could see what he was thinking. Dean stared for a moment and turned around. "Let's go and wait for a while." Zaxit was unwilling. "Aren't we going to harass them? If the wall of God of War was crumbling then we would have a little roll. But now it is still impregnable. The role of the few of us in such a battlefield is too small. We can't change the outcome." Dudian sighed. Zaxite also understood this, but he was still somewhat unwilling. This was their last and only hope of survival. "Let's wait for a while. Maybe there will be a change." Dean comforted him and left without looking back. Dean leaned against the hillside and continued to look at the battlefield after returning to the mountain. He was waiting for an opportunity. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean and others returned to the front of the wall of war to observe the situation. But in addition to the height of the corpses piled up outside the wall, the battle was still the same. They saw that the fire dragons weren't able to break through the defense of the wall. Many fire dragons' corpses fell on the slope and were pressed down by more corpses. Chapter 944. The situation that Dean and others were looking forward to didn't appear. On the contrary, the beast tide gradually thinned out. Many of the beasts separated from the main force and moved towards the surrounding areas. Dean and others met 2 small groups of retreating beasts on the high mountain. In the battle, 2 injured pioneers were killed. Now only Zaxit, Jason, Dean and Aisha were left. Originally there were more than a dozen people in the escape team. In just a few days, only a few of them were left. Zaxit's intention to escape gradually faded. He suddenly felt that it was better to stay in the wall than to be punished. He couldn't imagine what would happen if Dean and Jason were gone and he was the only one left. Would he gradually lose his humanity because of the monsters? Would he not even speak in the end? "What should we do now?" Zaxit and Jason looked at Dean. Even if they were used to being in a high position and had independent thoughts, they couldn't help but be at a loss at the moment. Dean was also confused. He didn't expect that such a huge attack from the aliens wouldn't cause much impact on the War God's wall. In the past few days, they often returned to the edge of the battlefield to observe. They tried to help when the monsters were strong, but they never had the opportunity. Now that the battle was about to end, it was obvious that such an opportunity wouldn't come again. This also meant that it was time for them to make a choice. They could either continue to escape or disguise as soldiers in distress and return to the War God's wall. In Dean's view, it was impossible for Zaxit to return to the War God's wall. His watch was left in the fortress. The War God's wall should have a record of his movement route. He could only continue to escape to destruction. However, his own combat system and Jason's were closed. There was no record of their escape route. If they returned, then there was a low chance that they wouldn't be regarded as deserters. However, the technical personnel in the border guards weren't fools. They were sent to the front line. The battle had lasted for so many days. There was no reason for them to survive. They must have deserted. The fate of deserters was to be executed or sent to places like the Monster Research Institute or coolies to play their remaining value. He sighed and felt a little annoyed. He ignored Zaxit and Jason's questions and sat on the hillside, deep in thought. Zash and Jason saw that Dean had no idea. They were silent as they tried to think of a way out. Another 3 days passed, and on the 8th day of the battle, the demonic beasts began to retreat in all directions. However, the number of surviving demonic beasts was less than 1/10 of their original number. Their retreat was very different from their previous orderly attack. They were like headless flies, scattering in all directions. After encountering several monsters, Dudian knew that they couldn't stay here for long. If they encountered some difficult monsters, they would most likely die here. Monsters that could survive the war until now were either lucky, had special abilities, or were very strong. It was rare to see pioneer-level monsters. "Let's go," Dean said to Jason and Zaxite as he dealt with a reptilian monster that had escaped. "Where to?" Zaxite quickly asked. Dean glanced at the direction of the God of War's wall. His eyes flashed for a moment, but he sighed and turned to the front. "Keep going!" Zaxite and Jason were startled. Zaxite sighed. He had been thinking about the survival rate of returning to the God of War's wall. However, the result was obvious. Now that the battle against the demonic beasts was over, the border guards were not short of people. Most of the deserters like him would be executed or sent to the worst place to mine energy and rare minerals for the Empire. It was no different from death or even more painful. Jason slightly clenched his fist and hesitated for a moment. He finally said to Dean, "Both of our combat systems are off. Will we be treated as deserters if we return? You said before that we can find other excuses and be punished." Dean shook his head. "It was possible before, but I didn't think that the battle would last for so long. It has been 7 or 8 days now. The fortress has long been breached. How could we persist in the battlefield outside the giant wall for so long with our strength? There's only one explanation, and that's that we've defected." Jason didn't give up. "We can say that we didn't have time to escape back to the God of War's wall after the fortress was breached. So we temporarily hid in another place. Isn't it a direct defection?" Dean sighed. "But the order given to us is to hold on to the fortress. There are only soldiers who are God of War. There is no living soldier. In their view, there is only one end for us, and that is to die in the fortress. If we survive, then we are deserters." There was a hint of struggle in Jason's eyes. He opened his mouth slightly, wanting to say something, but in the end, he closed his mouth and remained silent. Zaxite was stunned as he heard their conversation. "Did you turn off the combat system? How?" "It was destroyed, so it was turned off." Dean didn't explain in detail. "Let's move forward. I suspect that there are not all monsters outside the border. There are probably humans or other intelligent life forms. Maybe we can communicate with them. For example, the fire dragons. If we meet them, then we can cooperate with them." "Cooperation?" Zaxite and Jason looked at him in puzzlement. "The fire dragons want to invade the God of War's wall. Naturally, they want to understand the situation inside the wall. If it was us, we would also capture a few enemy soldiers and ask them for information," Dudian said. The two reacted. There was a trace of strange color in their eyes. This was worse than defection. However, this was one of the chances for them to survive. "Then let's go." Zaxite was very decisive. Dean took Shanghai Lisa over the mountains and continued to move forward. As they moved forward, there were monsters chasing them from behind. Fortunately, they were always on guard and hid in advance. The monsters seemed to be very flustered as they fled. Few monsters noticed them. They crossed the mountains, plains, and wastelands. They met a lot of monsters along the way. Most of them were pioneers and dominators. There were few abyssal monsters. This made the originally gloomy mood of the three gradually brighten up. They had met hundreds of abyssal monsters in the previous war. But now they had restored a lot of confidence. After all, the abyssal monsters were a minority. "This is the trace of the fire dragons." Dean looked at a burnt tree in the forest. Zaxite stepped forward and was about to reach out to touch it. Jason suddenly said, "Don't touch it." Zaxite quickly withdrew his hand and turned to look at him. "This thing seems to be poisonous." Jason picked up the withered branch from the ground and pushed away the charred bark. They saw that it was covered with sticky green tree sap. The tree sap swayed slightly, and when they saw it clearly, their expressions changed. The tree sap was made up of countless tiny insects, densely packed together, and the number was shocking. Although they were in the abyss, they were more careful than hunters. They wouldn't easily underestimate any monster, including small insects. They had seen the fire dragon's flames before. It was enough to burn the whole tree. But at this moment only a piece of bark was burned. It was most likely the credit of the green insects. Dudian slowly went deeper into the woods. He saw more and more burnt trees in a straight line. It should be the advance route of the fire dragons. Would it lead to the fire dragon's lair? Dean thought in his heart. He didn't know why he was looking forward to it. If he really met the fire dragon, then he might die. But there seemed to be an impulse to adventure and explore. Roar. Less than 10 minutes after they went deep into the forest, a sudden roar echoed from behind. It was hoarse and high-pitched. It was like a tiger roaring in the forest. It was full of deterrence. The pupils of the three shrank. They immediately shrank behind the trees to hide their bodies. The three of them were familiar with this roar. They had heard it countless times in the past few days. It was the roar of the fire dragon. Dean pulled Haisha to his side and hid behind a big tree. He stared at the back, and his pupils entered the X-ray state. Suddenly, he saw a brilliant sun-like light and shadow rapidly approaching. It was the shape of a fire dragon. However, the fire dragon seemed to be seriously injured. Half of its body was broken. From time to time, it landed on the ground and exerted force with its feet instead of relying on the remaining half of its wing. Dean's eyes flashed. He wanted to intercept it. But at this moment, he suddenly saw two red dots approaching rapidly behind the fire dragon. The heat was low, just at the level of pioneers. However, how could the pioneers chase after the fire dragon alien race? Obviously, the fire dragon was deliberately suppressing its body heat. Jason, who was behind the tree, winked at Dean. Obviously, he also saw the people chasing after the fire dragon. Dean motioned for them to stay still and not make a move. At this time, the fire dragon was approaching in a straight line. Before it reached the forest, a sound of breaking wind came from behind. It brushed past the side of the fire dragon and almost hit it. The fire dragon turned its body and dodged the attack, but the other heat source quickly closed the distance between them. Without any unnecessary words, it launched a ferocious attack as soon as it got close to the fire dragon, sticking closely to it. At this time, the three of them could clearly see the situation of the battle with their naked eyes. The faces of the two heat sources were human, but their bodies had been demonized. One was like an upright giant crocodile with an elongated face. The other one was full of green curly hair. It had countless slender limbs under its body. It looked like a centipede, but the limbs were extremely sharp. Dean's eyes moved as he saw the woman with green curly hair. He thought of the two children he adopted in the giant wall of Sylvia. One was called Gabriel and the other was called Artemis. Artemis had green hair. The reason why he adopted them was out of curiosity. At that time, he hadn't seen a person with green hair. He thought that it was the exclusive hair color of some hidden families in the inner wall. But after occupying the inner wall, he didn't see a person with green hair. So he didn't continue to pay attention to Artemis. He thought that it was because she lived on the edge of the outer wall and was exposed to radiation all year round. He didn't expect to see a person with green hair here. But he didn't know whether this person's green hair was a transformation of the demon's body or it was originally like this. Pin it down. The man with the body of an upright crocodile shouted and flew down. There was a pair of extremely short wings on his back. Compared to his ferocious appearance, it looked a little cute. He rushed to the ground and picked up the black spear that he had thrown earlier. The green-haired woman's body twisted like a viper. She waved her slender limbs to force the fire dragon to retreat. The surface of the fire dragon's body was red, but there was a golden flame inside. It was an elite fire dragon whose combat power was close to the upper level of the abyss. At the moment, half of its body was broken. It seemed that it was cut off from the shoulder. It was retreating under the fierce offensive of the green-haired woman. However, the green-haired woman didn't dare to push too hard. She retreated every time the fire dragon attacked. She didn't dare to be swept by the flames on its body. The crocodile man pulled out the black spear and was about to turn back to attack. But suddenly he rushed out and held the black spear to kill the fire dragon. Dean's heart sank when he saw the man's body stop. He knew that the three of them were probably exposed. Dean turned to look at Jason and Zash. Jason was still focused on the battle. Zash looked at Dean. He seemed to know that they were exposed. Dean nodded slightly to him and raised his hand. Zaxi was surprised to see the meaning of Dean's words. At this time, Jason also noticed Dean's gesture. There was a puzzled expression on his face. "If we don't take advantage of the situation to attack, we will die," Dean said in a low voice. Zash and Jason's face changed. These two dared to chase the fire dragon into this place. Their strength was obviously several times stronger than them. It was likely that they were from the upper level of the abyss. It could be seen from their offensive that they were faster and fiercer than the previous drillmaster, but they were from the lower level of the abyss. They were timid even if it was a sneak attack. "We can escape." Zash made a gesture. Dean slightly frowned. Escaping was indeed a way, but he wanted to see if he could kill the two of them in a sneak attack. If he could do it, he might be able to send their corpses back to the War God's wall in exchange for a chance to live. After all, these two were from the upper level of the abyss. The people above wouldn't think that he was the one who killed them. Even if they determined that he was a deserter, they might be able to forgive him. If these two had a strong background, then he could get the protection of the people behind them if he sent their bodies back. However, Zash and Jason didn't want to attack. They wouldn't have the energy to force them. Maybe they would slip away at the critical moment. Without their help, it was too risky for him and Aisha. Chapter 945. Zash and Jason looked at each other. They were reluctant, but Dean was the strongest. They couldn't stop him since he insisted on staying. Roar. The roar echoed. The fire dragon was completely suppressed by the two. It couldn't get out of the encirclement of the two. There were new injuries on its body. The old injuries hadn't healed yet. The more it fought, the more tired it became. The crocodile-shaped short-winged man's black spear didn't seem to be afraid of the fire dragon's raging flames. He waved the black spear and attacked fiercely, shaving off a few inches of the fire dragon's scales. When the flames covered the black spear, they were instantly extinguished, as if they were absorbed by the spear. The green-haired woman seemed to be worried. Although she cooperated with the crocodile-winged man to contain the fire dragon, she didn't dare to get close to it. Both of them had a tacit understanding and rich combat experience. They didn't give the fire dragon the slightest chance to break out of the encirclement. They didn't force it too much. They just slowly dragged it down and consumed its strength. Dean looked at them for a moment and sighed in his heart. The two of them were too stable. They didn't give the fire dragon any chance to counterattack. He was afraid that the fire dragon would be exhausted to death if this continued. They could join forces to quickly kill the fire dragon, but they chose to prolong the war of attrition. The reason was obvious. It should be that the other side was saving their strength to guard against their sneak attack. "Let's go," Dean helplessly signaled to Jason and Zash. Zashi and Jason were relieved when they saw Dean's gesture. They were worried that Dean would be stubborn and want to reap the benefits of the fisherman. Obviously, that kind of good thing was unrealistic. The two of them quietly lifted their feet and followed Dean to retreat. Huh! The crocodile-winged man who was fighting with the fire dragon glanced at the distant woods through the shoulder of the fire dragon. At this moment, the fire dragon seemed to be aware of the flaws. It roared and flew towards the crocodile-winged man. It opened its mouth and spat out a thick flame. The flame was extremely fast. It was faster than their bodies. The crocodile-shaped short-winged man's expression changed slightly. The flame spewed out by the fire dragon was extremely lethal. Even he didn't dare to be hit by it. Earlier, he had been paying attention to it and was ready to dodge it the moment it opened its mouth. But now it happened so suddenly. He hurriedly raised his hand and waved his black spear like a windmill. Countless spear shadows flew towards the flaming cannonball. The raging flames were smashed, and wisps of flames drifted away. Some of the flames came into contact with the crocodile-shaped short-winged man's body, and immediately started burning. The crocodile-shaped short-winged man was very decisive. His demonized arm slapped forward, tearing off the skin and flesh where the flame touched, and flinging it to the ground. The flame was erratic, but it did not extinguish. When he dug out the flames on his body, the crocodile-like short-winged man realized that the fire dragon had already taken the opportunity to charge forward. However, before it could get far, it was already stopped by the green-haired woman. If not for the green-haired woman, the attack just now might have given the fire dragon an opportunity to escape. Damn it! The crocodile-winged man gritted his teeth. He endured the pain and rushed forward with his spear. The fierce battle lasted for more than 10 minutes. The fire dragon finally ran out of energy. It looked up to the sky and wailed. The crocodile-winged man's spear pierced through its chest. Blood spilled. It fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the green-haired woman and the crocodile-winged man both looked to be in a sorry state. One of them had half of her curly hair burned off and was emitting a burnt smell, which greatly affected her appearance. The other had bloody holes all over her body, which was bleeding profusely. It's finally dead. William heaved a sigh of relief. He felt a wave of fatigue, but he did not relax. He swooped down with his spear and pierced the neck of the fire dragon. The spear pierced through its neck and beheaded its head. Only then did he feel relieved. He said to the green-haired woman who was slowly descending, "There was some movement in the forest earlier. Did you notice it?" There were 3 people. They seemed to be from the abyss. Shanima's eyes were cold. They must be deserters. We meet such fools in every war. They like to die. The corner of William's mouth curled into a cold smile. Looks like they're smart enough to know to retreat in time. Previously, I thought they would ambush us. Just as I was about to suppress this alien dragon man, I was going to pretend to be weak and injured to lure them into attacking us. Shanima said coldly, "Are we going to get rid of these scum? No need. They don't need us to deal with them. Don't waste our energy." William smiled. "Don't forget. They have other values. There are always idiots like them who like to be bait. They think they have a chance of survival. They don't know that they're just pathfinders for us." "That's true." Shanima nodded. Apart from the officers of the Crusaders, no one else should know that their battle armors are equipped with special tracking devices and mirrors. Their every move is being observed. I hope they get better and better. A free pathfinder is much better than spending a fortune to explore the isolated land every year. That's called recycling. William smiled. Let's not talk about this anymore. We should hurry up and move the fire dragon's corpse back. I wanted to capture it alive, but unfortunately, with our strength, we can't capture a golden fire dragon alive. Let's hope this corpse can provide us with some value. Shanima sighed. William nodded. He took out a string of rope from his small military bag and tied it to one of the fire dragon's legs. The rope was pitch black and looked like a metal chain. It made a clanking sound, but it also looked like rubber. It could be stretched longer. At this moment, it was being burned by the fire dragon's leg, but there were no signs of it catching on fire. Let's go. William grabbed the rope and dragged the dragon. Shanima nodded. She undid her demonic body and used her hunting sword to pick up the dragon's head. She followed behind William. Wait. Suddenly, Shanima cried out. William was stunned. He turned back. What's wrong? Shanima looked at the dragon's head. Her eyes widened. She was a little stunned. A trace of palpitation and fear appeared in the depths of her eyes. A whoosh. The three of them followed the traces of burning trees in the forest. After running for more than half an hour, the three of them gradually stopped. Dean looked back for a moment and sighed. It seems that they didn't catch up. Zaxi, Tay, and Jason looked around, but they didn't find any traces of the two, so they were slightly relieved. Are we going to follow the traces of the dragon? What if we find their lair? Zash looked at Dean. He hoped that he would change his mind. Dean had the same concerns in his heart. Although he was deeply interested in the lair of the dragon, but his life was more important. However, if they didn't explore the fire dragon's lair, they could only wander outside the borders in search of survival. However, this was definitely not a long-term solution. If they were unlucky and encountered something extremely terrifying, they would be directly killed and turned into food. Chapter 946. It seemed that it was the rainy season. Light rain fell from the gray sky, covering the mountains and the wasteland. Everything was covered with a clear shadow. Dean and the other two found a cave. They killed a sleeping thorn-tailed tiger and cooked it. They ate while looking at the rain outside the cave. They sank into their own thoughts. Dean silently looked at the flickering flames of the bonfire. Suddenly, he had the feeling of hunting low-level monsters in the ruins outside the giant wall. However, this place was more desperate than the ruins outside the giant wall. It was hopeless because he couldn't see a home. If a person didn't have a home, he would wander. Wandering people usually didn't talk much. Dean didn't know how long he would have to stay in this isolated place to find hope. He suddenly thought that he should keep moving forward in a straight line. Maybe he would find a new human settlement. However, the earth was so big. How far and how long would it take? There was no human to open up the boundless territory. The monsters had lived for hundreds of years. What kind of terrible existence would be born? He sighed. Suddenly he heard a croaking sound. He saw a toad crawling outside the cave. It was like a half-year-old baby. It was lying on the ground. Its mouth was slightly bulging. Half of an insect's legs and wings were exposed. It gently chewed and slowly swallowed. Then it slowly crawled in. Puff! Blood splattered. Zaxi threw a stone which penetrated the toad's head. The toad's body flew out and fell into the muddy rain outside the cave. Dean suddenly felt that they were very similar to this low-level monster frog. Would they mistakenly enter a territory and then be killed at will? Peaceful coexistence was advocated by humans. However, no one could do it. Monsters didn't have this concept at all. Rumble! Thunder sounded. The rolling thunder seemed to sweep over the top of his head. Sitting in the cave, Dean could feel a slight tremor. He looked at the sky outside the cave. With the sudden flash of thunder, the flash of white light seemed to be reflected in his eyes. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. Lightning! Dean's eyes were getting brighter and brighter. It was impossible to return to the War God's wall through the wall, but he could fly through the sky as long as he could avoid the detection of the thunderbirds in the clouds. As long as I can control lightning, I can go back. Hope ignited in Dean's heart, and he immediately thought about it seriously. After a while, he thought of two sets of method. First, find an opportunity to lure the thunderbird away, and then take the opportunity to smuggle. Second, he could create a set of insulating equipment or a conductive device to defuse the thunderbird's attack. This way, he could completely block the thunderbird's attack. I don't know what thunderbirds eat. Dean looked at the drizzle outside the cave and fell into deep thought. The air above the clouds was thin, so there should be no other creatures living there. Did thunderbirds look for plankton above the clouds as food? Or other birds? Or was it the thunder and lightning of nature? He suddenly felt that it was necessary to investigate, but the premise was that he had to first create a set of equipment to neutralize the lightning. This was a wasteland without any tools or materials. It was extremely difficult to create a conductive device out of thin air. It was practically impossible. But when there was no hope, it was worth trying even if it was impossible. Moreover, he wasn't an ordinary mortal. It was difficult to cut down trees without tools. Thinking of this, he immediately recalled the knowledge from the superchip. Making tools and then using the tools to upgrade the tools was equivalent to using natural materials to evolve from the primitive era to the era of steam machinery. The rain slowly stopped. The three of them came out of the cave. Dean said to Jason and Zaxit, "Let's find a place with weak distribution of monsters and live there. I have a way to go back." "A way to go back?" Zaxit and Jason were startled and looked at him in surprise. Dean nodded. "Yes, but the premise is that we have to make a lot of tools. We need your cooperation and a suitable long-term living environment. We can go back after 1 or 2 years." Their eyes lit up and Zaxi said excitedly, "Is what you said true?" "What way?" Jason quickly asked. "Fly back from the sky." Dean didn't hide. "There are thunderbirds over the War God's wall. So we need to make some tools to resist the Thunderbird's attack." "Fly back?" Zaxi and Jason exchanged glances, and the excitement in their eyes instantly weakened. Zaxi frowned and said, "That shouldn't be possible. The Thunderbirds are scattered above the Battle God wall, and their numbers are unimaginable. Even the alien races outside the wall wouldn't be able to invade." "That's why we need the help of tools," Dean said. "I know the tools to resist the lightning. But I don't know if I can make them. Let's try." Both of them were stunned and looked at Dean suspiciously. Tools to resist lightning? They had never heard of it. However, now that things had come to this, they had no other choice but to try. "Are we still looking for the traces of the fire dragon?" Zaxit looked at the burnt trees not far away. He could faintly see green worms crawling inside. Dean shook his head. "We didn't have a way to find the fire dragon. We can cooperate with them if they have wisdom. But it's too risky. Even if they can communicate with people, they may not sit down and negotiate with us. It's better not to get in touch with them." "Well," Zaxit nodded. He also had this concern before. "Then let's find a place." Dean turned around and took the lead. The three of them headed towards the depths of the wilderness with Dean in the lead. They followed the strength of the monsters they encountered along the way to determine the distribution of the monsters. When the monsters they encountered became stronger and stronger, the three of them would change their route and continue forward. After a few days, Dean took Haisha, Zaxi, and Jason to a plain area. The plain was inhabited by wolves, but their physique wasn't high. They had a wide field of vision, and there weren't any large monsters nearby. It was suitable for living. The only drawback was that there were no resources here. Stone and wood were scarce. However, Dean saw the foundations of the old era buildings in the depths of the plain. It was obvious that this area was once a civilized area. Chapter 947. Although they didn't have digging tools, but they were able to easily dig the soil with their magic claws. What surprised Dean was that Zaxi's magic marks not only had a strong attack ability, but was also particularly good at drilling. In just 10 minutes he was able to reach a depth of 100 meters. He was able to touch the deepest layer of rock in the area. There is iron in these stones, but it has rusted. It should be used by the people in the ancient era to cast buildings. Jason said after a moment of observation. The people in the ancient era were very intelligent. I feel that they were smarter than us. Zaxi replied. He didn't want to embarrass Jason by talking to himself. Dean frowned. We have to move fast. We are not sure if there is any iron ore in this area. If there isn't, then we have to move to another place. Jason stopped chatting and followed behind Zaxi to help him transport the soil. After a few hours, the three of them worked together to dig a deep well with a depth of 400 to 500 meters. They mined some impurities, iron ore and inferior copper ore from the deepest rock layer. There were also some other element minerals. They even mined a very small piece of gold. Although the output was low and it was many times worse than some of the big mining areas, but it was barely enough for Dean. He let Jason and Zaxi continue to mine the ore while he dug a pit more than 20 meters deep. He used ordinary stones to build a wall around the pit and made an underground furnace. When Jason returned to the surface, he saw Dean busy in the pit. He curiously asked, "What is he doing?" "Refining iron ore." "Do you know how to refine it? Otherwise, why would I ask you to find iron ore?" Jason was choked by Dean and couldn't speak. He smiled slightly, but he wasn't angry. He had some understanding of Dean's temperament along the way, so he didn't care. He laughed and said, "You are right. Do you need my help?" "Can you cast a stone pot out of the stone?" Dean asked. Jason thought for a moment. "I should be able to, then go and find firewood. The more the better," Dean said. Jason coughed helplessly, looked around the plains, and snuck towards the forest in the south. Dean built the underground furnace and sealed all the holes around it. He looked at Jason and Zaxite, who were resting and watching him. "You come to light the fire and wash the ore." Tashi looked at him curiously. "Have you smelted iron before?" "No." "Then how do you know?" "I'm smart." The short chat ended again. Zaxite obediently jumped down, picked up the firewood that Jason brought back, and threw it to the bottom of the furnace. Dean saw that the bottom of the stone-built stove was filled with firewood. The flame was extremely weak. He slightly shook his eyebrows. "You don't know how to make a fire?" Zaxit was stunned. "Isn't it already asleep?" "The fire is too small." "But the firewood is already full." "The firewood is full. How can there be room for flames?" Zaxite was stunned. Although he hadn't done this kind of work, but he understood Dean's words. He immediately took out half of the firewood and the flame became bigger. Zaxite was surprised. He shook his head and smiled. "I didn't expect these simple things to have so many tricks." On the other side, Jason looked at the various minerals piled up next to him. He scratched his head. "Do we need to wash the iron ore?" "There isn't a lot of water here." Dean shook his head. "I'll wash it." "You can classify the minerals." Jason coughed. "How do we classify them?" Dean was silent. He bowed his head and picked up the minerals. He distinguished the iron ore from the copper ore, coal, oil sands, and so on. Jason observed Dean's classification and soon learned it. He also followed according to the law. Then he saw Dean rubbing the sticky stones on the surface of the iron ore and the raised grains of sand. "Is this ore washing?" Jason was stunned. Dean slowly said, "It's a simple cleaning of the iron ore so as to avoid other trace mineral elements in it. It would be more troublesome to refine." Jason understood and followed suit, cleaning up the iron mine. Dean waited until the temperature of the underground furnace was almost the same. He threw the cleaned iron ore into the furnace and covered it with a huge stone cover. He let Zaxite continue to light the fire. Jason took the initiative to collect firewood when there was not much firewood left. Dean used the remaining stones to build a wall next to the furnace. Zaxite saw that Dean had built a wall to surround the furnace. He asked, "These stones can't stop the monster's attack. Do you want to dig some harder granite?" Dean glanced at him. "This is a shelter from the rain." Zaxite was surprised for a moment. He decided not to take the initiative to talk to Dudian. Dean saw Zaxite's figure turn back when he finished building the wall. There was no firewood in his hands, but he was holding a figure? Dean's pupils shrank as he looked at Jason. Soon, he saw that Jason was holding a human in his arms, but it was a zombie infected with the virus. Jason ran all the way to the front of Dean and threw the undead to the ground. She looked like she was in her 20s, but her mouth was split open, and her fangs were completely exposed. They were about the length of a finger, so that her whole lips couldn't close. Her face was distorted, and her eyes were red. There was no rational brilliance, only brutality. Zaxite noticed the undead here, and quickly jumped up. He said in surprise, "Undead? There are undead here?" Dean immediately said, "You go and light the fire first. Once the temperature drops it will be difficult to raise it again." Zaxi looked at him but eventually turned back to the underground furnace and continued to light the fire. Dean squatted down to check the clothes of the undead. They were tattered and stained with dried brown blood. Her chest was exposed but her skin was wrinkled. She had been exposed all year round. Her skin was as dark as an African's. But the woman was not an African but an Asian. Dean carefully identified for a moment before recognizing that the style of the clothes was from the old era. The expectation in his heart suddenly fell. He said to Jason, "It's the undead from the previous era. It is estimated that this land is the same as the land inside the War God's wall. There are monsters and undead everywhere. There are also fire dragons." Chapter 948. Probably. Dean didn't deny it, as he had also noticed the situation. The entire attack on the War God's wall seemed to be controlled by the fire dragons. It was precisely because of this that he firmly believed that the fire dragons had wisdom that wasn't weaker than humans. But how could there be such a powerful race on Earth in just 300 years? Was it the alien race that was left on Earth? If the fire dragons were an alien race, then what was the giant demon race? And what was the origami that was called God by the Kingdom of God? Dean felt that the alien race outside the wall should not be at the same level as the origami. Although he didn't see the power of the origami with his own eyes, but after controlling Sylvia, he read a lot of descriptions from some ancient materials. The power of the origami was beyond the abyss, and they were regarded as God. A corpse of the origami hiding inside the wall could deter extremely dangerous things. This was absolutely impossible for the alien race. Since there is an undead here, do you think there is someone living here? Jason looked at Dean with a bit of spirit in his eyes. Maybe, if we can find a replacement undead, then we can prove whether there are survivors here or not. Dean didn't raise his head. He used his hand to pinch the arm, shoulder and other parts of the undead. He felt the hardness of the bones inside. It had evolved to a relatively strong level. It was estimated that it had the fighting power of the pioneer level. If there was no parasitic soul worm, perhaps it would become a corpse king. How do you know that she is an undead from the previous era? Jason looked at him curiously. He felt that Dean seemed to know a lot of things that he didn't know. This was also the reason why Jason had been humble. This clothing is the style of the previous era. Dean didn't hide it. It was not a secret. You recognize the clothing of the previous era? Jason was surprised. He thought that Dean used some other method to distinguish it. Haven't you studied history? Dean glanced at him. It's always good to read more books. Jason smiled embarrassedly. I don't have time to read books. If I have time, I might as well think about how to hunt monsters. No matter how many books I read, I still have to rely on my fists to fight the monsters. That's because you're not far-sighted enough. Jason was speechless, but he felt that Dean's words were reasonable. He couldn't refute it. Everything they did now depended on Dean's knowledge. Even if they were from the abyss, they didn't know how to smelt iron ore. Although violence was the most direct way to solve the problem, but there were many problems that couldn't be solved by violence. If we encounter other zombies, they are not wearing clothes, how do we distinguish them? Jason asked modestly. This was a very critical question. Only a few undeads had clothes to cover their bodies. Most of the undeads had already worn off their clothes after years of fighting and living in the jungle. Like beasts, they only relied on their tough skin to resist external attack. By feeling, Dean interrupted. Jason was silent for a moment and suddenly thought of something. He grabbed the head of the female undead and handed it to Dean. Look, what is inside her head? Cold crystal? Cold crystal? Are you talking about soul crystals? Yes. Look at the soul crystals in her head, Jason said mysteriously. Dean saw his appearance, and his fingernails slightly protruded. The calcium-transparent nails suddenly turned black, like a sharp dagger. With a slight cut, the head in his hand was cut open. Suddenly, A large amount of red jam-like material flowed out from inside, exuding a strong stench like magma. It was very hot. When it dripped on Dean's palm, it felt like boiling water. Dean frowned slightly, shook off the blood on his palm, picked up the hair on the head, and shook it. The blood inside flowed out along the incision and fell on the weeds under his feet. The weeds suddenly emitted light smoke, as if they were corroded. Clatter! Suddenly, a blood-red crystal slid down from the head along with the blood. The water in the blood was evaporated by this rose-like blood-red crystal, and white smoke kept floating. Soul crystal? Dean's pupil shrank. The diamond-shaped surface and size of this blood-red crystal were exactly the same as the cold crystal he saw. However, the color difference between the two was huge. The cold crystal was transparent with a touch of light blue, but this one was blood-red, blazing like a flame. This soul crystal is completely different from the soul crystals we have seen before. The soul crystals we have seen are as cold as ice, but this one is as hot as fire. Do you think the soul crystals in the heads of other undeads are the same? Jason's eyes moved away from the blood-red crystal and looked at Dean. Dean was in a daze and didn't seem to hear Jason's words. After a long time, he slowly recovered. He saw that the temperature of the blood flowing on the ground had gradually decreased. It was not as hot as before, and gradually returned to normal temperature. This phenomenon was the same as when he took out the cold crystal from the head of the undead. When there was no soul crystal, the body and cranial tissues of the undeads would gradually return to normal temperature. One is ice, one is fire. Dean's thoughts were chaotic. He faintly felt that he seemed to have grasped some clues leading to the unknown, the most mysterious secret. Jason saw Dean's blank expression, and finally had a feeling that the two of them were equal. He secretly smiled in his heart, and suddenly an idea came to him. He asked, "Do you think we will have a reaction if we absorb this thing?" Absorb? Dean was silent for a moment. "I don't know, but we will die miserably." Jason sighed. "This is also true. One is extreme ice, the other is extreme heat. The body will certainly not be able to withstand the two extreme energies in the body. But do you think we will also have a country here?" Dean knew what he meant. When he saw the red flame soul crystal, his mind outlined a new world map. The kingdom of God controlled the cold crystal undeads, and there may be a new country outside the kingdom that controlled the flame soul crystal. In other places there may be other types of soul crystals. Perhaps each type of soul crystal was controlled by a country. If this was the case, then the area of human forces in this post-disaster world was beyond his imagination. Originally in his imagination, after the disaster, human beings were curled up in a corner of the world, struggling at death's door. At first he thought that the giant wall was the gathering place of the last survivors of the world. Later he learned about the Empire. Now that he was out of the Empire, he suddenly found that there may be other countries outside. He didn't know whether his guess was correct or not, but the flame soul crystal and the fire dragon really made his imagination run wild. "If I can see the whole picture of the world at a glance, it will be good." Dean sighed in his heart. Exploring step by step like this was like moving forward in the endless darkness. Although it was exciting, it was also tiring. "If I find other undeads, I will bring them back for you to identify." Jason saw that Dean had nothing to say, so he no longer delayed. He stood up and returned to the forest where he previously collected firewood. Dean picked up the flame soul crystal from the blood. At this moment, the temperature of the soul crystal was not as strong as before. He suddenly thought of something. He raised the soul crystal and looked at the sun. Under the sunlight, the color of the flame soul crystal became more and more delicate. But in the depths of the blood-red soul crystal, there seemed to be a faint shadow, like a small worm, fixed inside. "Sure enough, there is." Dean's eyes flashed slightly. After thinking for a moment, he used the splitter to cut the soul crystal. The hardness of the soul crystal was extremely high, comparable to a diamond, but the sharpness of the splitter was more magnificent. Under the rapid friction back and forth, the soul crystal was quickly cut in half. Inside, a blood-like mucus suddenly flowed out. It was relatively hot. In this mucus, there was a small worm the size of an ant. It seemed to be dead. Along with the blood-red mucus, it was motionless, without any life reaction. Dean picked it up with his fingernails and looked at it. This small worm was smooth, like a very small earthworm. There was nothing special about it. He repeatedly observed it, but still couldn't see anything strange, so he could only give up. There may be such a small worm in other soul crystals, but how can this thing be dead? Is it because I cut the soul crystal? Or is it just an embryo? Dean suddenly felt creepy as he thought of this. What were these undead spawn for? If the virus that infected them was deliberately created, then what was the purpose? Dean was lost in thoughts for a long time. It was not until Zaxi called him for the third time that he recovered. The temperature of the furnace was high enough. There were signs of iron or melting inside. Dean immediately put away his thoughts and jumped in front of the underground furnace to check the degree of smelting iron ore. He prepared the stone pot, stone hammer and other tools. He was ready to forge the first ironware. Dean's requirements for the first ironware were not high. He wanted the purity to reach the farmer's whole level. Then he would use the ironware to manufacture and smelt it. Then he would be able to greatly improve the purity of the subsequent iron. Time flew. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The underground furnace was constantly burning. It had smelted a complete set of large ironware tools and several sets of iron models. The progress was very fast. In the past 3 days, Jason had brought back 6 undeads while he was collecting firewood. All of them were naked. The degree of body mutation was relatively large. Some of the undeads were hard to see as human. Their bodies were protruding with sharp bone spurs, sharp teeth and monster-like hair. Some of them even had 7 or 8 eyeballs on their faces. It was very terrifying. Even Dean couldn't identify whether these undeads were from the previous era or survivors of the disaster. The soul crystals taken out of the walking corpses' heads were all scarlet red blaze soul crystals, without exception. In his spare time, Dean caught 2 small monsters on the plain and used surgery to embed the flame soul crystal into their bodies. Through experiments, Dean found that directly embedding the soul crystal into the monster's body did not have any effect. Instead, the place where the soul crystal was embedded would gradually decay, necrosis, and grow malignant tumors. So he implanted the unknown worm in the soul crystal into the little monster's body. It didn't take long for the little monster's body to change, and its physique was greatly improved. When Dean slaughtered the little monster, he found that this ordinary little monster had turned into a named monster with a parasitic soul worm in its body. This amazing discovery surprised Dean. He didn't expect that the little thing in the soul crystal was actually the larva of the parasitic soul worm. He suddenly thought of the record in the Empire's Monster Encyclopedia. He felt a chill all over his body. Obviously, God's kingdom had long known this secret. Those monsters with magic marks were called named monsters. Why was it called named? The word named seemed to have explained the reason. Perhaps these monsters were experimentally produced by God's kingdom, which gave them a new life and a new name. Why did God's kingdom create these named monsters? Was it just to use these things to cultivate magic marks warriors? Dean thought of Sylvia's Witcher family. They were fighters before the arrival of the magic marks warrior era. They used the bodies of monsters to mix with humans to create half-human, half-demon monsters. However, this experiment gradually came to an end and withdrew from the stage of history. It was replaced by the more glorious and popular magic marks warrior evolution method. Today's Abyss, and even the Lord of the Abyss, all relied on magic marks. But what about the king above the Abyss? Dean suddenly felt a little confused. He didn't know if the ultimate goal of using magic marks to evolve was to become the Lord of the Abyss. Would this be a wrong path? He felt that his thoughts were in a mess. There were too many things that he couldn't sort out. So many of his inferences and guesses were likely to be wrong or had other explanations. He slowly gave up his clueless guesses and continued to devote himself to industrial manufacturing. The purification of iron ore was very smooth. A lot of copper ore was also extracted and made into brass and copper wire. Copper wire was the main material of electric wires. On the 7th day, an accident suddenly came. In the early morning, Zaxi was looking for ore underground, Jason was picking firewood, and Dean was forging the extracted iron into utensils. They were busy when a figure suddenly came from the end of the plane. A human figure. Dean was aware of it as the figure gradually approached. He looked up and was instantly shocked. He had never thought that he would see other humans on this plane, unless they were pursuers from the border guards. But there was a human standing in front of him. Moreover, it was a girl of 14 or 15 years old. She was wearing primitive linen clothes, but her skin was white. She had bright eyes and white teeth. She looked very clean and beautiful. She had a ponytail and looked lively and cute. At the moment, she was also surprised to see Dean and the other two. Her mouth was open but she couldn't speak. You. The girl looked at Dean and the other two. Dean was startled as he heard her words. He didn't think that he could hear her. Moreover, he didn't expect that she would speak in the common language of the giant wall. Was she from the War God's wall? Chapter 949. Human? Zaxi was stunned. Although he had fantasized that there might be humans living in the isolated land, but he didn't expect to meet them here. Moreover, it was so sudden that he wasn't prepared for it. Dean came back to his senses. His eyes flashed as he immediately saw the girl's heat source. She was only at pioneer level, but there wasn't the slightest murderous aura around her. It was as if she was just a little girl from an ordinary family. Whoosh! Jason's figure flashed and blocked the girl's retreat. Who are you? Why are you here? The girl didn't seem to feel his killing intent. She looked at him in surprise. Who are you? Why are you here? Are you from the Empire? Jason frowned as he noticed her language. Empire? The girl was surprised for a moment. She raised her finger and pointed in the direction of Dean and others. Do you mean the Shenluo Empire on the other side of the wall? Shenluo Empire? Dean's heart was moved. Was this the name of the kingdom of God? Jason stared at her. That's right. Are you from there too? The girl seemed to ignore his question. How did you come here? Are you the vanguard sent by the Shenluo Empire? You haven't answered my question yet, Jason said in a cold voice. Zaxi chuckled as he saw Jason's expression. Jason, don't be so nervous. Don't scare the little girl. Jason's face didn't change. You'd better not be careless. Don't forget where you are. Do you really think that ordinary people can survive here? Zaxi regained his gentle demeanor and smiled. Nothing is impossible. She shouldn't be living here alone, right? He then asked the girl. The young girl giggled and said, Yes, I live here with my father. Many years ago, when I was still very young, my father brought me here from the Shenluo Empire and we lived here. With your father? Many years ago? Jason frowned. So, there are only you and your father here? How did you come here? Why are you living here? The girl was slightly dissatisfied with his questioning attitude. She frowned slightly but still answered, You'll have to ask my father about this. By the way, my father is very powerful. As long as he doesn't provoke those pyro people, none of the monsters here can hurt him. Jason snorted coldly and thought to himself, I don't need you to tell me that your father's strength must be extraordinary to be able to live here for so many years. Fire dragon people, are you referring to the fire dragon race? Zaxi immediately asked, Do you know where they live? You want to find them? The girl looked at him strangely and said, Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't go south. That's where they gather. If you meet them, only death awaits you. Even my father doesn't dare to go there easily. Jason stared at her. You better answer my question. Why are you living here? Since your father is so strong, why did he leave the Shenluo Empire and come here? If you don't tell me, then I don't mind using force. Although I know that your strength may not be inferior to ours, but the three of us together can keep you. Hey, Zaxi said, don't be so excessive. Then, he looked at Dean, hoping that he could persuade him. Dean was silent. He also felt that there was a problem with the girl. Jason's words reminded him that there was a great possibility that the girl was hiding the intensity of the heat source. Perhaps it was the middle or upper abyss. The three of them together may not be her opponent. This point could be seen from her fearless attitude after coming here. To say that she was innocent and didn't understand fear, Dean would never believe it. How can you be so fierce? The girl frowned as she heard Jason's words. But she saw Jason's cold face. She knew that he would do what he said. She pouted and said in an aggrieved tone, Dad said that there are no good people in the Shenluo Empire. That's why we escaped outside the wall. We thought that we would meet new humans here. But the dragons here are not easy to deal with. So we can only live here. Jason coldly said, If you don't tell the truth, then don't blame me for forcing you. I'm telling the truth. The girl bit her lips. Dad is right. You people from the Shenluo Empire are not good people. If you dare to bully me, then my dad won't let you go. This is the territory of my family. He knows that I came out to play. If I don't go back on time, then he will come out to find me. He will definitely find you. This place is very big. We can go far away. You don't have to scare me. Jason coldly said. You. The girl looked at him angrily. Zash saw that the atmosphere was a bit stiff and quickly said, Jason, don't be so fierce. Didn't she say that her father is here? Why don't we go and see her father? They have lived here for so long. Maybe they can show us the way. If you offend her, then, even if we can escape, we won't be able to wander outside the borders for the rest of our lives. Jason frowned and looked at Dean. Dean was silent. In fact, he was thinking about this point. If he directly captured the girl, then the relationship between them would be completely stiff, and the hope they had finally seen would be extinguished. But if they followed the girl to meet her father, and her father's strength was stronger than the three of them combined, then they would be at a disadvantage. Moreover, they weren't sure whether the father she mentioned was real or not. In case they went back with her and waited for the strong people of the entire clan. Dean, you decide. Zaxi handed over the decision to Dean. The girl realized that Dean, who had been silent all this time, was the leader of the three. She curiously looked at Dean, and then glanced at Aisha, who was next to Dean. A trace of imperceptible color flashed in the depths of her eyes. My companion has offended you. I hope you can forgive her. Dean pondered for a moment and slowly said, I have a few questions to ask you. I hope you can tell us the truth. The girl saw that Dean's attitude was calm, so she restored her relaxed and lively attitude. She nodded. You can ask. I will tell you the truth as long as you don't hurt me. What is your real strength? Dean stared at her. The girl slightly pouted. She didn't expect Dean to ask a sharper question than Jason. But she had already promised, so she reluctantly said, I don't know. I just heard from my father that I should be regarded as the abyss of the Shenluo Empire. Abyss? Zash and Jason's pupils shrank. Although they had expected it, they didn't expect that the petite and lively girl would be as strong as them. Dean's eyes narrowed. The abyss is divided into several levels. Which level are you? Several levels? The girl was surprised. Really? Dean stared at her for a moment. He couldn't tell whether she really didn't know or she was deliberately lying. His heart was not sure, so he simply skipped it. If he continued to ask, it would become a forced confession. Although what he was doing now was a forced confession, at least he could save face. So he asked again, What level is your father? The girl shook her head. I don't know either. In any case, my father is stronger than me. He can kill many monsters that I can't defeat. If it's as you said, that the abyss is divided into several levels, then maybe my father is the strongest level. Dean was silent. When the girl said that she was an abyss, he knew that her father was most likely an upper abyss, or even an abyss master. So the girl shouldn't be lying. Zaxi Tay and Jason looked at each other with complicated expressions. The girl was already an abyss, and the very powerful father she mentioned was naturally an even more powerful abyss. Fortunately, they did not force her. Otherwise, if they really caught the girl, they would not be able to stay here anymore and would have to change places. After a brief silence, Dean asked a few more questions. What's your name? My name is Dana. Dad said that I'm a flower that will never wither. What do you do for a living? Hunting monsters. There are also some plants that we can eat. What do you rely on to improve your strength? Dad said that the insects in the monster's body are called soulworms. Are you the same? Dean didn't answer but stared at her. Have you eaten human flesh? Dana was stunned. She shook her head and said, How is that possible? There are monsters everywhere here. We can't eat the flesh of those corpse-like humans. Dad said that there's a virus in their flesh. Dean nodded slightly. His expression softened. Is your home far from here? We want to visit your father. Dana smiled. It's not far. I can lead the way. Dad hasn't met people from the Shenluo Empire for a long time. He will be very happy to see you. I hope so. Dean smiled as he picked up the luggage and backpack from the ground. He looked at Jason and Zash. You should also pack up and get ready to go. Jason and Zash were stunned. They didn't expect Dean to make a decision so quickly. Jason wanted to say something but didn't. He knew that Zash was biased, so it was useless to say anything. Are we going now? Zash was stunned as he saw Dean ready to go. Shouldn't we pack up the things here? It won't be too late to pack up when we come back, Dean said as he picked up the luggage and walked towards Dana. Zash was speechless. He wanted to say that it wasn't easy for the underground furnace to reach this temperature. But he saw that Dean was already in front of Dana. He knew that it was useless to say anything. He picked up his luggage and backpack. He was about to catch up with Dean's footsteps when he saw a cold light flashed. Dean was smiling as he walked towards Dana. He swung his sword and cut off Dana's body. She was cut from the waist. The beautiful girl fell to the ground. There was a look of astonishment and disbelief on her face. Go. Dean had already thrown off his luggage and entered the Reaper's body. His body was covered with sharp blades. Whoosh! Dana, whose body had been split into two on the ground, slapped out with her palm and slid forward. Puff! Puff! The lower half of her body that was left on the ground was pierced by a sharp blade and instantly shattered into palm-sized chunks of flesh. The sudden change made Zaxi Tay and Jason unable to react, but Jason's reaction was still faster than Zaxi T's. He was overjoyed and immediately entered his demon body to rush forward. His body was like a gecko crawling quickly on the ground, and sharp thorns erected all over his body. Dinah, who could not dodge in time, was immediately pierced in the abdomen by his sharp claws. She fell to the ground and screamed in pain. Dean quickly stepped forward. The black mucus on his demonized arm retreated like a tide, revealing his robust arm. He punched Dana's temple. Dana's scream came to an abrupt end as she fainted. Go, Dean said to Jason. He picked up the luggage and ran along the plain with Lisa. Without any explanation, Jason picked up Dana's upper body and followed closely behind, crawling quickly on his hands and feet. Zaxit finally reacted. He was stunned for a while, then he immediately picked up his luggage and followed. After 4 or 5 hours, they were 200 or 300 kilometers away from the iron smelting plain. They met a lot of monsters along the way, but most of them were at the pioneer level. They only met 2 abyss-level monsters which were quickly killed by the 3 of them. The three stopped on a peak that looked like an extinct volcano. Dean threw the luggage to the side and sat down to rest. Zashi and Jason gasped for breath. Now that they could rest, Zashi immediately shouted, "Why did you kill her? Did she say something wrong?" Jason sat opposite to Dean. Although he knew that Dean would not hurt him, Dean's sneak attack on Dana still left a shadow in his heart. At this moment, he looked at Dean in puzzlement, waiting for his explanation. "She lied," Dean said after his breath gradually calmed down. "She said that her home is not far from here. If that's the case, they should have noticed us since we have been here for 7 or 8 days." Zash was stunned. "Is that the reason?" Dean shook his head and turned to stare at him. "The power in her body is very strange. It's not because of magic marks. She suddenly appeared here. I think she should have known about our existence and deliberately came over." "This is all your speculation," Zash couldn't help but angrily say. Jason quietly looked at Dean. "You should know something else, right?" Dean looked at him, slightly silent. "What else?" Zaxi looked at Dean anxiously. Dean's eyes fell on Dana's body on the ground. "Take off her clothes and wake her up." "You?" Zash stared at him. Chapter 950. I believe that if you didn't read 10 lines at a glance, you would be able to see that the book was not advocating despicable behavior. On the contrary, it was full of mockery. Whether it was the previous events or the actions of the main character, they were all like this. The main character was not a hero, so the main character had no relatives, and his only true love had become a walking corpse. This was the current fate of the main character. I want to say, this book had never intended to appeal to the general public. A long time ago, it was stated that minors should not read it, and those who could not continue reading it should not read it. I only wanted to write what I wanted to express. If you could understand it, then so be it. If not, then leave. I also never thought about making a lot of money. It was enough to satisfy myself with eating and drinking. If I wanted to make money, I would have written a fantasy long ago. Here, I repeat, if you only see darkness and mistakenly think that this book advocates for such things, then leave as soon as possible. Back when the book had just surpassed 1,000,000 words, I had already prepared myself for the book to be sealed at any time. But I would still continue writing what I wanted to write. Including the reviews, I rarely read them. Occasionally, I would glance at them. I didn't want to be disturbed by any external factors. When I finished writing the second half of the year, this book would be over. Since it was sealed early, I would start a new book early. That was all. Chapter 951. Pain, abuse, cutting flesh, crawling insects. Jason's torture methods were very professional. He tried all kinds of torture methods. He knew that pain alone wouldn't make Dana surrender. So he chose to use various methods to find Dana's weaknesses, the things she feared. Dana didn't fail to live up to her identity as an abyss level. Her willpower was exceptionally strong. Not only did she not confess, she didn't even beg for mercy. But Jason's methods were not limited to these. He killed Dana's sleep and weakened her willpower. The torture didn't last overnight. Dean moved his position after a day on the peak of the extinct volcano. He didn't want his whereabouts to be leaked. Dana was tortured all the time. She couldn't sleep at the same time. She was seriously injured. She was exhausted due to continuous insomnia. She looked weak and haggard. It seemed that she would die at any time. When the 5th day passed, Zaxi couldn't wait any longer. He came up with some ideas, hoping to open Dana's mouth faster. Although he didn't approve of Dean's attack on Dana. But now he hoped to get some useful information from Dana's mouth. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Dinah, who hadn't slept for half a month and was constantly subjected to the resplendent light, was already on the verge of collapse. During this period of time, she had suffered all kinds of torment that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. Poisonous insects crawled all over her body, Needles were used to pierce her eyeballs and carve words on them, flames were used to burn her wounds, and all sorts of obscene and filthy things happened between her and her father. If it was anyone else who had suffered so much, they would have long since collapsed and lost their sanity. Dean admitted that he couldn't bear so much pain and torture. He felt that he was far less than Jason and Zashi in terms of abusing people. Most of the torture he had seen and heard happened in the Thorn prison, but it was only a small prison in Sylvia. Although it was dark and hopeless, the prisoners were all physically tortured. Dana, on the other hand, suffered both physical and mental blows. Especially when Zaxi Tay deliberately slandered her and told her many unbearable things about her father, she was in great pain. After the extreme coercion, Jason and Zaxit resorted to seducing Dana, slowly asking her questions. When she was obedient, they would appropriately lighten the punishment and devastation. "Tell me honestly, who else is here besides your father?" On the hillside, Jason looked at Dana, who was dirty and had messy hair, and asked coldly. At the same time, he was holding two venomous snakes with bright patterns in his hands. The venomous snakes struggled to wrap around his arm, but they couldn't bite down. They kept wriggling, which was disgusting. Dana managed to keep her eyelids open and said weakly, only my father." Jason coldly snorted and hung two poisonous snakes around her neck. When he loosened his grip, the poisonous snake immediately climbed onto her chest, and the other wrapped around her neck, strangling her as if it wanted to take revenge on this human. However, the two snakes were only low-level magical beasts. Although their venom was strong, it was almost useless in front of their poison resistance. The strength of the snakes was also very weak to Dana, but the writhing snakes were enough to make her feel disgusted. However, she was already used to this kind of thing and didn't have much of a reaction. What she wanted to do most right now was to close her eyes and sleep. However, every time she closed her eyes for more than 3 seconds, a sharp pain would pierce her body, forcing her to open her eyes. "What's your purpose in approaching us?" Jason said coldly. After half a month of interrogation, he had basically confirmed that the father that Dana mentioned really existed. Otherwise, when Zaxi Tay made up the story of her and her father being in a mess, she wouldn't have reacted so fiercely. It was as if the most precious place of a virgin had been violated. Dana gasped and couldn't speak. Jason undid his pants and revealed his lower body. He pointed it at her. "If you don't speak, I'll wash your face." What was the most painful? Humiliation. Jason had humiliated her in every possible way, from her body to her soul. He had trampled on her dignity, made it worthless, slandered the things she cherished, and played with her body, which had never been touched by the opposite sex other than her father. Dana was already numb to it. She even felt that death was heaven, but with Zaxi Tay and Jason taking turns to look after her, she couldn't commit suicide. At the moment, Jason's body was exposed in front of her. If it was in the past, she would have already blushed. But at this moment there was only humiliation, pain, and slightly powerless anger. In the silence, the warm liquid drenched her body, and the pungent smell almost made her faint. Her body trembled slightly, and when the liquid was all over, she gritted her teeth and said, "What did I do wrong?" Jason frowned but didn't answer her. No one could answer this question. Compared to the torture she had suffered, no matter what she had done wrong, she shouldn't have to endure such a painful life. But life wasn't mathematics. 1 + 1 = 2. When the result comes out, the process is the truth. Even if you can't accept the truth. Zaxi Tay and Dean were sitting and resting. They looked at Jason's actions. Although they felt that it was a bit excessive, they tacitly didn't speak to stop him. Dean suddenly discovered that when you want to do a bad thing, you will become a devil. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Dana finally collapsed. Tears fell like rain as she answered all the questions that Jason had asked. However, the answer she gave made Dudian and the other two frown. Because her answer was exactly the same as the first time. She had come out to wander and met Dean and others. She lived with her father in the underground base that was 100 miles away from the plane. Her father was much stronger than her. She didn't know the specific level, but she said that her father was a very smart person. There were many machines in their residence that were made by her father. She and her father had lived here for many years. She wanted to go back to the war wall, but her father stopped her every time she mentioned it. She had seen the fire dragons but didn't have any dealings with them. She only knew that the fire dragons' camp was in the south. The double magic marks in her body were implanted by her father using the machinery that her father had made. She didn't say that her father's magic marks were his. She stubbornly resisted Jason and Zaxi T's repeated torture until her spirit collapsed. She became a madman who could only giggle. Jason and Zaxi T thought that she was pretending to be stupid and told a lot of dirty and despicable things. However, she still giggled as if she was listening to a book from heaven. Your father is a despicable villain, dirty and shameless. If so, then smile for me. Ha ha ha. Come on, open your mouth and hold this. Ha ha ha. Apart from screaming in pain, Dana only knew how to giggle. Even when Jason rubbed his penis on her face, she still giggled foolishly. Dean couldn't stand it anymore. Jason and Zaxi's interrogation methods were more despicable than he had imagined. But he didn't stop them, as it would be futile to say anything. His heart was soon replaced by a new idea. He thought that if Dana was crazy, would she speak the truth? How could he make her speak? Dean told his thoughts to Jason and Zaxite. Their eyes lit up as they felt that the crazy Dana might be easier to interrogate than before. So they tried various methods. From torture to candy temptation, it proved that the effect of pain on a crazy person was far less than candy temptation. Pain was meaningless when it didn't bring fear. Dana slowly learned to nod under the comfort and temptation of the two. She slowly learned to communicate from a fool. However, after a few days, when Jason asked all the questions again, the answers he got were still the same as before. Jason, Zaxi Tay and Dudian couldn't accept the result. They had to admit one thing. Maybe they were really wrong. Dana didn't intend to deceive them from beginning to end. It was all because of their suspicion. Realizing this point, the three immediately realized their despicable behavior. They suddenly felt that they despised themselves. However, this feeling was only temporary and soon faded away. People were always quick to forgive themselves. What should we do now? Jason asked Dean. Zaxi Tay looked at Dean. There was dissatisfaction in his eyes. I have already said that your guess is just a guess. Why can't you think about the good side of things? Why do you think of others so sinister? Dean looked at him but didn't say anything. He took Zaxi T's criticism as a lesson for his wrong decision. He thought for a moment. In any case, at least we got the address of her father. Although I don't know what her father's magic marks are, but I think he is most likely the same as her. It is very likely that he has double magic marks and has the ability of 2 soul worms. Zaxi snorted coldly. So what if we know this? If we followed her back, we might have already gotten a clue from her father about how to sneak back to the God of War Wall and return to the God of War Wall. We wouldn't have to live in fear in this godforsaken place. At this point, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of saliva and cursed in his heart. Jason saw that there was a smell of gunpowder between them. It is useless to talk about it now. Let's think about what to do next. In my opinion, her father should have searched everywhere since she has been missing for so long. It won't be difficult for him to find the plane where we smelt steel. He will be able to recognize us by collecting our smell. So even if we disguise ourselves as passers-by, it will be useless. We can only follow Dean's words and take down her father. Do you still listen to him? Zaxi Tay raised his eyebrows. Jason glanced at him. Now that things have come to this, if we fight amongst ourselves, our chances of survival will be even slimmer. Zaxi T's eyes were gloomy. He wanted to say something, but in the end he suppressed his anger. He knew that it was not good for him to fight with Dean at this time. Whether Jason was on his side or not, Dean's strength was enough to defeat both of them. The enemy is in the light while we are in the dark. Since we know the address of her father, we should prepare a sneak attack, Dean calmly said. Jason frowned. Do you have a plan? It is too difficult. Moreover, her father has double magic marks. It is difficult, but there is still hope, Dean said. Zaxite coldly snorted. Even if you are a middle abyss but both of us are lower abyss, can the three of us fight against the Lord of the Abyss? Even if her father is an upper abyss, he is enough to kill us easily. Not to mention a more powerful existence. We are indeed at a disadvantage, but we also have advantages. Dean ignored his tone and calmly said, Don't forget that we have the chips in our hands. Moreover, we have two key advantages. What chips and advantages do we have? Zaxite asked. Dean raised his hand and pointed at Dana, who was on the ground. That is our chips. As for the advantages, I said that the enemy is in the light while we are in the dark. That is the first advantage. The second advantage is that Jason said that her father might have collected our scent and followed it. This is one of our advantages. We can use our scent to lure him into the trap. Jason and Zaxite were startled. Zaxite put away the dissatisfaction in his eyes as he seriously looked at Dean. I didn't expect that it would be an advantage in your eyes. Jason opened his mouth and sighed softly. I was worried that our scent would be exposed and make things even more difficult. According to what you said, it is indeed a great weapon. Yes. Zaxite nodded. Although he was still unwilling to admit that Dean made a mistake and missed the opportunity to return to the wall, he had to admit that Dean was right. Why do you say that she is the chips? Jason asked. Are we going to use her to hold her father? Of course it's not something as stupid as taking hostages. Dean shook his head. We can use her hand to hurt her father. No matter what, her father won't guard against his daughter. Both of them were startled. They looked at Dean. There was a trace of fear in their eyes. The youth, who looked much younger than them, was not only ruthless but also insidious. Fortunately, he wasn't their enemy. How can we make her attack her father? Zaxite thought. Is it training? Dean shook his head and interrupted. Let's talk about this later. We have been here for a long time. Let's move to another place. We will take our time. Both of them didn't ask any more questions. They packed their luggage and set off. Chapter 952. Zash and Jason didn't expect Dean to be so vigilant. They felt that it was unnecessary. However, considering the 1% possibility that Dana was pretending to be stupid, they agreed with Dean's point of view. They only had one life. They didn't want to take risks if it wasn't necessary. In the next few days, Zash, Jason, and Dean used various methods to test Dana. For example, two of them would go out to hunt while one of them would guard the place. The guard's attitude was relatively sloppy. He would either turn his back to Dana or be attracted by the sudden appearance of a small monster and inadvertently walk away. Dana seemed to be really stupid. She just lay on the ground and giggled. There was no action. Dean tried to deliberately dig a pit for Dana during training to test her reaction. But she still giggled. After a few days of trying, the three of them were finally convinced that Dana was really crazy. Her acting skills were so profound that there were no flaws. This is palm leaf juice. It can cover up the smell of our body. Zash brought back some thick leaves when he went out to hunt. He could gently rub them into dark green juice. We don't have time to react when we suddenly encounter her father. Although we have been constantly changing locations and covering up our scents these past few days, we will still leave behind some flaws. A senior once warned me that as long as we appear, we will definitely leave something behind. When we encounter someone with extremely strong perception, it will be a fatal flaw. Palm leaf juice? Jason was surprised as he saw the leaves in his hand. There are palm leaves here. Dean didn't say anything as he saw that both of them seemed to know about this thing. Zash and Jason rubbed the leaf juice all over their body. Then they smeared the rest on Dana's body. Naturally, they couldn't avoid physical contact during the process. Both of them had a tacit understanding with each other. Dana giggled and didn't resist. Even when they touched the sensitive parts of her chest, she let out a soft groan. It was very tempting. Unfortunately, the lower half of her body is gone. Jason felt slightly regretful. Zash smiled but didn't say anything. Although they weren't tempted by beauty, but after all they were men. Dean glanced at Zaxit. Zaxit was trying to stop Zaxit, but now he seemed to be enjoying it. It was like a person who had done a very bad thing. He didn't feel any shame when he did some petty things. After applying the palm juice, the three of them changed their location again. After half a month of exploration, the three of them discovered that as long as they stayed close to the War God Wall, they wouldn't encounter too powerful demonic beasts. If they went deeper, they would encounter more Dominator-rank demonic beasts and overlords. They might even encounter abyss beasts, as well as 2 or 3 abyssal clan beast packs. In the blink of an eye, 5 days had passed. The three of them changed their positions many times, staying in each place for no more than a day. Along the way, they used all kinds of leaf juice, soil, and the hair of the monsters they peeled to change the smell. In addition, Jason also told Dean and Zashi about a secret recipe to eliminate the smell. It was to mix the blood of the monster with ashes. He also had a special bottle of ash powder that he brought with him. He mixed it with water and stirred it into a pulp. Then he smeared it all over the body to seal the pores and minimize the spread of the smell. "Come, tell me, kiss Daddy." "Pa, pa, pa." Dana giggled. Jason, who was training her, smiled. "How to kiss?" He handed a blood-stained monster's leg to her. Dana giggled and bit down hard, tearing off a large piece of flesh. She giggled and said, "Kiss, kiss Daddy. Good girl." Jason patted her head to show his appreciation. Dana's face was as happy as a cat's, and she enjoyed his touch very much. Jason pointed to a venomous python that had been hunted. "That's Dad." "Daddy, Daddy?" Dana's reaction was a bit slow. She turned her head and saw the dead poisonous python on the ground. A silly smile slowly appeared in her eyes. Her arms suddenly pushed off the ground and she quickly leaped over, hugging the poisonous python. She opened her mouth and fiercely bit it, tearing off a piece of flesh. Her voice was muffled as she giggled foolishly, "Dear father, father, good girl." Jason smiled even more contentedly and stroked her head. Dana's face was filled with obedience as she leaned into his embrace. Zash and Dean were sitting on the stone next to Jason. Zash looked at Dean as he saw the excellent results of Jason's training. Will it really work? What if his father has a strong poison resistance? Then we can only blame our bad luck. Dean shook his head. His sneak attack was to hide the venom in Dana's 2 molars. When she bit, the venom would be injected into the body of the bitten target, just like a poison monster. Will your poison really work? Zaxi Tay was still unsure. It can directly poison the abyss, so it should be a relatively poisonous venom. If we can find something more poisonous, then it can be used as a substitute, Dean said. The poison in his body was a mixture of the venom of the ice dragon and other monsters. There was also the poison of the poisonous dart frog. This poison had made the ruler of Sylvia lose his ability to fight. Now the effect of the poison had soared. It wasn't difficult to poison the abyss, but the magic marks had a high resistance to the poison. Even the abyss was immune to the poison, so the effect would be greatly reduced. But there was also an advantage. Usually people with strong resistance would have defensive-type magic mark. It meant that their perception and attack ability were slightly inferior. They had been changing positions for so many days, but Dana's father hadn't caught up with them. It showed that her father's perception wasn't strong. If it was me with double magic marks, then I would choose perception and attack or attack and defense. His father should be like this. Dean secretly thought. His eyes flashed as he glanced at Zashi, who was next to him. There was a glimmer of light in his eyes. 3 days later, the three of them were ready and officially set sail to return to the iron-making plane. After 2 days of travel, the three of them were getting closer and closer to the iron-making plane. There were no clouds in the sky and the stars were shining brightly. The three of them gathered at the edge of the woods and ate the low-level monsters they had hunted. They sat on the branches and looked at the moon. There was no entertainment in the long night. They were in a daze and daydreaming. It was the only way to pass the time. The moonlight is so beautiful. I don't know if we can fly up, Jason said whimsically as he found a topic. Zaxi suddenly laughed. How can we fly up? Just the thunderbirds in the clouds are enough to kill us. There are no thunderbirds outside the borders. But I heard that the higher we fly, the colder it gets. In the end we will be frozen into an ice sculpture. That's right. It's just like us. Jason sighed as he looked at the dark forest. We humans are probably the only beings in the world who know how to look up and appreciate the starry sky. Zash shrugged, of course. What do these low-level monsters know? I heard that we humans used to spread all over the world. We were the masters of all creatures. Jason nodded. There was yearning and regret in his eyes. Dean listened to the chatter of the two. There was a bit of desire in his heart to talk under the moonlight. But he held back. After a long while, he slowly said, Perhaps it is because we know how to look up and appreciate that we want to conquer and destroy. Jason asked curiously, Conquer? Are you saying that someone wants to conquer the starry sky? Everything you see, you want to take it for yourself, unless it's garbage, isn't it? Dean asked back. That's right. Jason nodded. Especially beautiful women. Zash chuckled. Jason laughed heartily. Dean got up. I'm going to relieve myself. I'm going to look around to see if there are any monsters from the abyss. Should I accompany you? No. Don't go too far. Be careful. Signal if there is danger. Both of them exhorted. Dean jumped down from the treetops and took Aisha out of the woods. They went to the mountain next to them and peed. After walking for more than 10 miles, he handed the roasted monster's flesh to Aisha. He cut it with the splitter knife so that she could eat it slowly and gracefully. After she finished eating, he used a soft handkerchief to wipe her lip. As he was about to return, he saw a heat source approaching from the edge of his field of vision. Human? Dean's pupils shrank as he saw the outline of the heat source. It was an upright human figure. Although there was still some difference from the human body, it was like an oval red shadow. But he had used the heat source to identify human beings countless times, so he had rich experience. The hair all over his body stood on end. The first person he thought of was the father that Dana had mentioned. Did he catch up? Dean soon calmed down. He frowned as he felt that the person's reaction was a bit strange. It seemed that he wasn't Dana's father. If her father was tracking them, how could he walk slowly and swagger? He should have lurked in the dark or rushed at full speed. But the heat source was walking very slowly. It seemed that it was just a normal stroll. Sometimes it stopped and seemed to be identifying the direction. Dean's eyes flashed as he thought for a moment. Finally, he took Aisha and quietly touched the place. If it wasn't Dana's father, then who could it be? He was very curious. Was there someone else on this lonely land? Or a local resident? 10 minutes later, he and Aisha quietly approached the place. Dadian quietly peeked out from a crack in the boulder. He was shocked and widened his eyes. This person was Dana. She had the same style of linen, the same color of light blonde hair, and the same face. The only difference was that her body was intact. It was the same as the first time Dean saw Dana. Dean's heart twitched. Even though he had seen countless bloody scenes, he was lost for a moment. He felt that he had seen a ghost. Wasn't Dana with Zaxit and Jason? Wasn't her waist cut off by him? Wasn't she crazy because of their torture? Who? Dana, who was standing in front of Dean, suddenly turned back and looked directly at the place where Dean was hiding. Dean's face was ugly. His breath had fluctuated for a moment and exposed him. He didn't expect that he would make such a low-level mistake after experiencing so many dangerous battles. His mind was not calm enough. Perhaps he felt guilty and ashamed of torturing Dana, so he had such a big reaction? He didn't know why, but he knew that he had to come out. There was no point in hiding. When he came out from behind the boulder, Dean suddenly found that the Dana in front of him was a little different from the Dana he had met before. Their hairstyles were different. The previous Dana had a ponytail and looked very innocent and lively. But this Dana had loose hair that was scattered on her shoulders. She had the noble and elegant look of a princess. Her expression was more indifferent. Human. Dana's eyes flashed when she saw Dean. Then she noticed Aisha, who was next to Dean. Her eyes were full of surprise. "I'm just passing by. My name is Dean. Who are you?" Dean tentatively asked. He took the initiative to be friendly, but his heart was a little nervous. "My name is Dana," the girl said. Dean's pupils contracted for a moment but soon returned to normal. His expression didn't change. He smiled as if he had heard the name for the first time. "It's a really good name." The girl looked at him. There was a trace of inexplicable meaning in her eyes. "You seem to have heard of this name?" "When I was a child, I had a friend with this name. It seems that there are a lot of people with this name." Dean chuckled. The girl stared at him. She saw Dean's natural smile. Finally, she slowly retracted her sharp eyes and asked, "Why are you here?" "Listening to your language. Are you from there?" She pointed to the war god's wall. Dean nodded. There was a trace of embarrassment on his face. "Not long ago there was a war. I was separated from the main force and ended up here. I guess I'm a deserter now. I don't dare to go back." The girl asked, "Are you alone?" Dean immediately shook his head. His head shook like a rattle. He looked very honest and reserved. "There were 8 people who were separated from me. They were resting on the other side. I came out to pee and patrol the surroundings. I didn't expect to meet you. Are you a resident here?" His eyes lit up and his face was full of excitement. The girl shook her head. "I'm the same as you. I came from the other side of the wall. But I've lived here for a long time." "A long time?" Dean was surprised. "Can you live here? Aren't there fire dragons hovering here? Haven't you seen them?" "We have a way to avoid them." The girl shook her head slightly. She didn't want to talk more about this. She looked at Dean. "Your teammates are over there. Why don't you take me to see them? I've been here since I was a child. I haven't seen what the people outside are like," she said with a curious look. Dean couldn't help but think of Dana, who he had met before. Her innocent smile and eyes showed that she wasn't on guard. "They are rude. If you don't mind, please come with me," Dean said seriously. He moved sideways to make an invitation. He waited for the girl to slowly approach. Her light footsteps stepped on the grass. It was as if she was stepping on his heart. When the girl came in front of him, Dean smiled and stepped forward to guide her. The girl followed closely behind. She looked around and asked, "Did you and your teammates see a girl who looks like me?" "She's also called Dana. She's my younger sister." Dean was surprised. "You have the same name as your sister?" The girl nodded and asked, "Have you seen her?" Dean shook his head. "No. If I had seen her, I would have invited her to come with us." "That's true." Dean curiously asked, "How can you have the same name as your sister? Did she get separated from you?" "Yes. She went out to play half a month ago and never came back. My dad was worried to death. He has been looking for her everywhere. I also came out to look for her until now. It's late at night." The girl sighed. There was a bit of sadness between her eyebrows. Dean looked at her appearance. He couldn't bear to see her like this. But he still showed a regretful and sympathetic expression. She should be lost, or... When the word "yes" came out of his mouth, he suddenly waved the splitter in his hand without warning. With a clang, sparks flew everywhere. The sound of the collision was particularly loud in the night. Dean and Dana pulled away from each other. Both of them were shocked. Dean didn't expect that Dana, who had been listening to him indifferently, would react the moment he attacked. She would block his attack. The girl also didn't expect that Dean's attack would be so fierce. Although she was prepared, she almost couldn't resist. At the moment, the weapon in her hand was broken. Her arm was cut and she was injured. You were prepared? Dean's face turned gloomy. He hoped that the previous sound would alarm Jason and Zaxi. But the distance was too far so they wouldn't be able to hear it. Where is my sister? The girl looked at Dean coldly. How do you know that I'm related to her? Dean asked. Although your performance was flawless, but there is one thing you may not know. Your backpack has already exposed you. The girl sneered. Backpack? Dean was startled. Suddenly a light flashed in his mind. Do you mean the thing inside? Yes, the flesh of the origami. The girl said in a cold voice. My dad detected the reaction of the flesh of the origami not long after you came to the plane. But he was in the middle of the experiment and couldn't get out. So he asked my sister to come and take you back. I didn't expect her to fall into your hands. Dean was startled. They were exposed as soon as they arrived at the plane? Did Dana know about them? How was it possible? He couldn't accept it. He didn't want to believe it. But he felt that there was no reason for Dana to deceive him. He gradually calmed down and slowly recalled the situation when he first met Dana. Now that he thought about it carefully, he suddenly realized that there were many details in Dana's performance. There were many flaws and doubtful points that were definitely not limited to the few he had observed earlier. For example, the surprise on Dana's face when she saw them was obviously more intentional. Now that they thought about it, it was even more obvious that she was acting. In addition, Dana didn't show any fear. Anyone who stayed in the habitat of the monsters would know to be careful. But Dana directly approached them. She didn't use stealth or camouflage. Even when she saw them, she didn't show any obvious fear. If it was an ordinary person who met a few of the same kind with unknown strength, it wouldn't just be a surprise. But because of Dana's naivety, they mistakenly thought that she was too innocent. She didn't know that people were sinister. That's why she believed them so easily. However, the other party's purpose was to take them back to her father's place. As for the purpose, it was likely to be the flesh of the origami in his backpack. They thought that others were naive. Maybe they were also naive in Dana's eyes. However, there was one thing he couldn't figure out. He asked, "Why didn't your father let both of you come together? With your strength, you should be able to directly capture us." The girl coldly snorted. "It doesn't matter if I tell you. My sister and I have very different living habits. She only comes out during the day and stays at home at night. I only come out at night and don't go out during the day. Moreover, my father has already detected that the three of you are just lower abyss monsters. With my sister's strength, it would be easy to subdue the three of you." Dean's face slightly changed. The two of them alternated day and night? What was the reason? He didn't believe that it was just living habit. It was likely because of their magic marks or other reasons. Some monsters liked to hunt at night, while some liked to hunt during the day. In addition, her words revealed a lot of information. First of all, her father could actually perceive that they were lower abyss monsters. It must be known that they all hid their heat source. But how far away was her father? At least out of their range of perception. It was incredible that her father could not only perceive them but also know their specific strength from such a far distance. However, if her father's perception was outstanding, then why hadn't he caught up with them after so many days? Was he unable to get away? He felt that it should be impossible. After all, almost a month had passed. Could it be that her father had detected their strength with the help of some instrument? Dean noticed that she had said, detected the reaction of the flesh and blood of the origami. Although the meaning of detection and perception was similar, Dean felt that they were two different things. In his opinion, perception only represented the ability of the body. Detection not only included the detection of instruments but also the detection of the body. If it was an instrument, then it could explain why her father couldn't track them. However, this also extended to another piece of information. That was, her father had very sophisticated equipment, and the technology content was extremely high. As he was thinking about the pros and cons, he was suddenly shocked and his face turned ugly. He glanced in the direction where he came from and saw Jason and Zaxi, as well as the crazy Dana. In the previous repeated interrogation, Jason naturally asked her whether she approached them with a purpose or whether it was an accident. But Dana's answer was no. From beginning to end, her answer didn't change. So much so that the interrogators believed that she had completely confessed. However, if it was an ordinary captive, there would always be some discrepancies in the answers. At the beginning, they wanted to hide things but gradually loosened their mouths. But Dana didn't change. This was a very suspicious point. But somehow they mistakenly thought that she was too simple and didn't lie from the beginning. She was an innocent and kind-hearted girl. Now it seemed that her confession couldn't be taken seriously. It was estimated that half of it was true and half of it was false. Moreover, she shouldn't be crazy. If a person was stupid, how could they make the same answer and reaction as before? The more Dean thought about it, the more scared he became. He suddenly felt that he had made a big mistake. The cause of this big mistake was that he underestimated Dana. It wasn't only him. Jason and Zaxi were also deceived by Dana. They had a preconceived idea that Dana might be an innocent girl. That was why they thought that the torture would make her crazy. But now it seemed that Dana approached them with the intention of bringing them back to her father. The reason why she didn't adopt a forceful and direct attack was very simple. If it was her, when she was confident that she could suppress the three of them, she would fearlessly choose to use a gentler method to lure them over. This way, it would save her energy. If they had refused Dana, then perhaps they would have faced her thunderous attack. Moreover, if he hadn't taken the initiative to attack, then perhaps Dana would have attacked first. Just like now. When he attacked, the girl was on guard and was able to parry in time. Moreover, she had seen through his identity. He suspected that she probably took into account that he defeated her sister. So she didn't attack from the front but had the same plan as him. Otherwise, how could she be so defenseless when she came over? Didn't her performance make him relax his vigilance? There were countless cases of failure or death because of contempt. Dean also knew that he shouldn't despise anyone. Even a lion needs to use all its strength to catch a rabbit. But he still made this mistake, and it was a fatal one. No one could avoid committing a crime knowingly. Perhaps this was something that the most profound philosophy couldn't change. Fortunately, he met the girl. Otherwise, they would have taken Dana to attack her father. It was like sending sheep into a tiger's mouth. He was glad in his heart. He was even grateful to the girl in front of him. "Your sister's perception should be quite good, right?" Dean suddenly asked. The girl indifferently said, "It seems that you have already experienced it?" Dean slightly nodded and sighed in his heart. It was too dangerous. At the moment the last doubt in his heart had been answered. Perhaps she had heard that they had tested whether Dana was crazy or not. Perhaps she had also sensed that they had pretended to leave but hid in the dark to observe. Chapter 953. With my sister's strength, it's easy for her to deal with you lower abyssals. What despicable means did you use to make her fall in your hands? The girl said coldly. Dean indifferently said, "Didn't you personally experience the despicable means used? So that's how it is." The girl thought of Dean's sneak attack, and the coldness in her eyes intensified. "Since that's the case, get ready to be buried with her." After that, dark red mucus slowly emerged from her body, like extremely thick plasma, and slowly covered her snow-white arms, neck, and other positions. Dean saw that the appearance of the dark red mucus was very similar to the appearance when they entered the devil's body. However, he didn't see the girl use a hunter's tool. The mucus seemed to gush out from her pores. As the mucus covered her body, her limbs slowly changed and mutated. The petite lowly body became more and more ferocious and strange. Her pale blonde wavy hair was also slowly covered by the mucus and became like a helmet. At the same time, the ends of her hair split into 6 or 7 strange sharp horns. Dean was convinced that the strange mucus was the same substance as the demon hunter, and it promoted her to enter the complete state of the demonic body. He didn't dare to be careless. The split blade in his hand melted and quickly covered his whole body. Sharp blades protruded out, revealing a ferocious posture like a tyrant. The sharp blades all over his body reflected cold light, as if they could cut off his sight. Both of them completed their demonic bodies almost at the same time. Dean looked at the girl. At this moment, she didn't have half a human appearance. Her body was towering, and the legs and hips of her lower body were lying on the ground like a scorpion, splitting into 7 or 8 sharp claws. The skin on the abdomen of her upper body was snow-white, but this kind of white was not the delicate skin of a human. It was like a layer of fish scales or gelatinous skin, extremely smooth. On this extremely smooth skin, there was a faint face, and the outline was similar to the girl's. Her arms had also become monstrous arms that were more than a meter long. Her arms were covered in armor and spikes. The head on her neck had become extremely horrifying. Her face was completely distorted, and her eyes had expanded to the size of a baby's fist. Her pupils were blood-red, as if they were about to drip blood. Sharp teeth of different lengths protruded from her mouth, making her look like a wild beast. In addition to the strange shape of the demonic body, Dean noticed that there was a faint layer of golden light around her body. He had seen this feeling before. It was the same as the layer of golden light that was brought by the power of origami on his blade. Could it be that her body also contained the power of the desolate god's flesh and blood? The girl was also sizing up Dean as Dean was looking at her. She felt a bit tricky when she saw that Dean's body was covered with sharp blades. It was like the status of hedgehogs and porcupines in the animal world. Even if they met a beast that could kill them, they would feel that it was difficult to kill them and they would have to pay a big price. The two of them were sizing each other up, observing and weighing each other. At the same time, they were analyzing each other's weaknesses and strengths based on their appearances. The night suddenly became extremely quiet. Dean looked at the extremely faint outline of the girl's face that was exposed under the snow-white skin of her abdomen. His heart suddenly moved. He couldn't figure out whether the core of the girl was the ferocious head on her neck or the faint face on her abdomen. However, the face on her abdomen gave him inspiration. He immediately used the dragon blood technique to control the muscles in her abdomen and said with ventriloquism, "Do you have the flesh and blood of the desolate god in your body?" While he was talking, his mouth opened correspondingly, but he didn't make any sound. The girl didn't respond to him. After a short silence, her figure suddenly flashed, and she suddenly dashed toward him. Whoosh! The 8 monstrous claws on her lower body quickly crawled like a scorpion, but also like an extremely fast spider. They almost reached him in an instant. Dean was shocked. His body's hormones erupted in an instant. His feet crisscrossed on the ground and suddenly rotated. He swung the sharp blades like a hedgehog top. This was the strongest defensive move that he had come up with, Thorn Shield. Clang! Clang! The girl swung her monstrous arm. As soon as she touched the periphery of the rotating sharp blades, there was a cutting sound. She immediately retracted her hand. Her monstrous arm's wrist was cut off, and blood kept flowing. She retreated dozens of meters and looked at Dean with a ferocious face. It seemed that she didn't expect that Dean's blades would be so sharp. She had always been very confident in her physical strength. Even if she was bitten by some abyssal monsters with amazing bite force, she would only feel a little pain but would not be injured. She didn't expect that in front of Dean, she would be directly cut off with just one touch. She suddenly somewhat understood why her sister would fall in the hands of this person. Perhaps the opponent's strength was not as good as hers, but with such a terrifying attack, only one blow would be enough to kill her. The anger in her heart gradually calmed down. At this time, Dean also stopped from rotating, but he didn't pounce on her. Obviously, he intended to stop her by remaining still. Her speed is even faster than that gorilla instructor. The opponent's magic mark has a greater increase in speed. Her demonic body has undergone such an exaggerated mutation. Obviously, the increase in physique is weaker, but she still has such speed. Is she an upper abyss? Dean's eyes flashed and his face was dignified. He had killed a gorilla instructor, and he had a new definition of his strength, which was comparable to the middle abyss. But in front of him was an upper abyss, and there was a huge gap in strength. However, fortunately, his eyes could still capture the girl's movements, or he would really be dead. Puff! At this time, the girl suddenly waved another monstrous arm's sharp claws and slashed at the wound that was cut by Dean. The cut was 2 centimeters thick, and blood gushed out faster. But in less than 10 seconds, it immediately stopped, and the wound seemed to have signs of scarring. After dealing with the wound, the girl continued to look at Dean. Half a minute later, she suddenly rushed over again. The moment she approached Dean, her body suddenly swayed, and she appeared at the side. Like lightning, a phantom seemed to appear in the place where she was. Dean immediately used the thorn shield again to defend, and the rotating blade had 360 degrees without any dead angle. The girl was about to attack from the side, but when she saw that Dean had successfully released the thorn shield, she immediately jumped back. Her violent face became more and more ferocious. Suddenly, she opened her mouth, and her cheeks bulged like a toad. Her cheeks were bigger than her whole head, and then she suddenly spat out. A jet of black water, or rather mucus, shot out. Dean, who was using the thorn shield to defend, didn't have time to release the thorn shield to dodge. When he saw the black mucus shooting at him, his face slightly changed, but he could only watch it rush over and hit him. Although the thorn shield was extremely strong in defense, its shortcomings were also very obvious. It was easy to get dizzy after a long time, and the physical consumption was fast, and the position couldn't be moved. Chapter 954. What's going on? Dean was shocked, but he did not dare to stop. At this time, the girl's bulging cheeks were getting smaller and smaller, and the black mucus in her mouth was slowly ejected out. Without waiting for Dean to relax, she took a deep breath, and her cheeks bulged again. Dean's face changed, and he quickly stopped his body. At the critical moment, he jumped away to avoid the black mucus spat out by the girl. At the same time, Dean also saw the situation of his body. The sharp blades were all stained with black mucus, and as he spun and swung, the mucus was like a very sticky glue, pulled out black silk, entangled layer by layer like a big net, and stuck his sharp blades together. Waving and stretching became extremely difficult. He had no time to think about what the black mucus was, and whether it was poisonous or not. He saw the girl had already rushed over, and in a flash she was in front of him. Her fierce face was full of roar, and the sharp teeth in her mouth slightly protruded a few inches, becoming sharper and sharper, biting Dean's face. Dean was shocked, and hurriedly raised the sharp blade to stab. Suddenly, the shadow flashed, and the sharp blade penetrated through the girl's body, but there was no blood, and the shadow dissipated. At the same time, a cold air suddenly attacked from the side. The girl's sharp claws were like sharp knives, stabbing straight at Dean's waist. This change was too fast, and Dean had no time to turn his body. Just when the girl thought that her attack was successful, she suddenly felt pain in her palm, and her face suddenly changed. The 8 strange claws under her abdomen crawled very fast, not only temporarily stopped, but also instantly pulled away. She looked at the sharp blade that pierced her palm, and the pain made her face ferocious. When she looked up again, she saw that Dean's body slowly mutated into a sharp blade. This incomparably sharp blade could actually be ejected. The girl gritted her teeth. She was obviously stronger than Dean, but she suffered 2 losses in a row. However, these 2 losses were not without gains. The first time, she knew that Dean's blade was sharp, and the second time, she knew that Dean's blade could be ejected. If he throws out all the sharp blades while spinning, he can probably kill a circle of the abyss. The girl looked at Dean calmly, secretly trying to figure out Dean's hidden abilities and combat skills. However, she thought that Dean did not shoot out a sharp blade when he was rotating. It should not be to hide this point, but to shoot out a single sharp blade when he was rotating. He could not control the accuracy and would cause harm to her. If all of them were shot out, then the gap would be fatal when Dean regenerated a new blade. Moreover, this move was extremely effective against group attacks, but it was a bit of a waste in a one-on-one battle. Dean looked at the girl who was temporarily forced to retreat. His face was gloomy. In a head-on confrontation, his physique was completely crushed. Fortunately, the sharp blade was sharp enough. Even if the girl was much stronger than him, she could still seriously injure or even kill him. However, his speed couldn't touch the girl, so he could only rely on sneak attacks. However, the young girl was not a fool. She had more combat experience than him. If not for the fact that she did not know his strength and was ambushed, she would not have suffered so many losses. Now that she was on guard, it would be very difficult for him to hurt her again, and he could not do anything to her. Therefore, after 2 consecutive seemingly advantageous situations, his mood became more and more depressed. Whoosh! Another sharp blade suddenly flew out. The girl's body swayed and easily avoided it. Although the speed of the ejection of the sharp blade was fast, it was still slower than the waving of the sharp blade. After all, the ejection of the sharp blade mainly relied on the compression of the muscles and the push of the bone. There were very few tissues that could transmit the force. Humph, with this strength, I overestimated you. The girl pulled out the sharp blade in her palm, but did not abandon it. She held the other end and held it as a sword. Dean saw that she wanted to use her own sharp blade to attack him. He could not help but feel funny and a little ironic. Fortunately, these sharp blades would gradually become weak and vulnerable after leaving his body. Whoosh! He shot out another sharp blade, and at the same time, stimulated the bones to accelerate the growth of a new sharp blade. The girl easily avoided it again. After half a minute, Dean shot out another sharp blade and urged the growth of a new sharp blade. After several times, the girl immediately saw through Dean's idea. She frowned and did not give Dean a chance to replace the sharp blade. She quickly flew over. The moment she approached, she suddenly bounced forward. The 8 strange claws under her abdomen suddenly turned into countless afterimages, covering Dean's whole body. Dean had no time to use the thorn shield. Even if he used it, the initial speed was not fast enough, and he would be defeated. He could only wave the sharp blades on his body, like countless hair ribbons fluttering in the air. They shot forward, slanted, curved, or picked up, stabbing at the girl from different angles. This was completely a posture of mutual destruction. He could not avoid the girl's attack, and could only attack in place of defense. Puff, puff. In the blink of an eye, the two had attacked each other hundreds of times. Then it was like a repulsive force broke out between the two, bouncing their bodies. Dean took a few steps back, and the sharp blade behind his tail pierced into the soil, like a third leg support, stopping his body. He looked down at the 3 cup-sized blood holes in the gap of the sharp blade on his chest, and his eyes flickered slightly. On the other side, the girl's injury was much more serious than Dean's. 2.5 of the 8 strange claws on her lower body were cut off, and the remaining claws also had deep or shallow scratches, and the wounds were bleeding. The girl had seen the fierceness of Dean's sharp blade, and the wounds caused by it could not heal. She could only cut off the pierced and scratched wounds, cut off the nearby flesh, and create new wounds by herself. The wounds caused by her could be healed, and the capillaries and flesh tissue would not be completely destroyed. Whoosh, whoosh. Dean ejected a sharp blade, and at the same time accelerated the growth of new sharp blades. In the blink of an eye, all the sharp blades were restored to new, and the sharp blades stained with black mucus were all ejected. The girl bandaged her wounds and looked at the recovered Dean. The ferocious look on her face did not diminish. The battle seemed to have returned to the starting point. Only the injuries on her body proved that the previous battle had happened. Your magic mark is very good, but it's a pity that its ability is too simple. The corner of the girl's mouth slightly tilted up, and her twisted face looked more ferocious. Since you forced me to this point, I won't let you die easily. After that, the sound of bones twisting came out from her body. Her body suddenly doubled in size, and sharp thorns grew on her back. Her upper body leaned forward, like a crawling lizard with 8 legs. God's Thorn. Chapter 955. So fast. Dean's pupils shrank. He saw a black shadow in his line of sight. Before his body could react, the shadow had already arrived in front of him. At this moment it was too late for him to use the thorn shield. He would be hit before he could even rotate. In a hurry, he instinctively raised all the sharp blades in front of him, either to parry or to stab. At this moment the black shadow suddenly flashed, like a ghost arc blade, and a chill instantly came from behind. Dean's omnidirectional vision clearly saw that the girl turned into a black shadow and went around to his back. His face instantly turned pale. It was unbelievable that she could still turn at such a fast speed. Was that not the limit of her speed? He saw the girl's movement, but at this moment, all his sharp blades rushed forward, and it was too late to defend. All of this happened in a total of less than half a second. The black shadow suddenly hit the root of the sharp blade on Dean's back. Although his whole body was covered with sharp blades, the gap between the blades was the weakness of his body. Bang! Dean's body leaned forward, and the severe pain made him feel like his whole back was torn, like a sharp cone piercing his whole spine. He groaned in pain. Before he landed, he saw the girl chasing after him like a shadow. From under her armpits, 2 snake-like tentacles suddenly shot out and wrapped around Dean's legs. In the demonized state, Dean's legs were also protruding with extremely sharp spikes, but the snake-like tentacles wrapped around the gap of the spikes and pulled Dean. The next moment, Dean felt pain in his feet and his body rolled forward. Ignoring the severe pain, he quickly climbed up and used the sharp blades to protect his whole body. He found the girl's figure for the first time, but his face changed. He saw that the tentacles under her armpits were slightly bent, wrapping around a leg full of sharp blades. This leg was naturally his. He felt that one of his legs was cut off from the knee, and the blood kept flowing. The girl's face was full of violence, but there was a hint of playfulness in it. She looked at Dean ferociously, and the corners of her mouth seemed to pull out a smirk. She casually threw off the tentacles that were wrapped around her calf. In the process of throwing off the tentacles, several shadows flashed like lightning, and the calf instantly shattered into pieces of flesh and broken bones scattered on the ground. There was no possibility of reconnecting it. Dean stared at her, his eyes gloomy, but his forehead was overflowing with fine cold sweat. Injuries were common in battles, and broken limbs were also very common. In such a disadvantageous situation, it was already very lucky that he could save his life. The strength of this girl was much stronger than he had imagined. Her physique completely crushed his, and she had many kinds of abilities. He felt a bit like a trapped beast, unable to escape. Pain, anger, and a cold mood made it difficult for Dean to calm down, but he tried to hold back many distractions and forced himself to calm down. He did not think about what his future life would be like after breaking his leg, whether it would affect his future strength, whether he would become a waste. At this moment, he only thought about how to escape from here, or how to turn defeat into victory. However, as the girl said, the weakness of his ability was that it was too single. Although the ultimate attack was strong, if it was restrained, unable to attack the enemy, or if the enemy could withstand your attack, then you would lose all advantages. Blood hunt. The girl slightly grinned, and her figure suddenly flew over. Dean's pupils shrank, and his vision was raised to the extreme. He captured the girl's figure, which was a little clearer than before. He could see her body, but it was still a little blurred. Whoosh! When she approached from the front, Dean was just about to defend, but the girl suddenly changed direction and appeared on the side. Dean had long been prepared, and his sharp blade quickly changed direction. However, the girl's figure turned again and appeared behind him. When his sharp blade turned back, the girl changed direction again and appeared on the left side. This time Dean's sharp blade could not keep up with her speed. He only felt a pain on the left side of his waist, and the girl's figure appeared more than 10 meters in front of him, with a piece of mixed carapace and flesh in her mouth. Dean looked at the bloody wound on his waist that was bitten. His face was ugly, but his brows were tightly wrinkled. He seemed to have seen the girl's specialty, and that was extreme speed change. She could still quickly change position and direction while moving at high speed. This was simply a godly existence in close combat. And this ability most likely came from the 8 strange claws in her lower body. Dean noticed that her strange claws were not only sharp, but also had some peculiar structure. There were cartilage and juvenile hooves on the inside of the claws. The credit for the rapid change of direction mostly came from these 2 structures. He had seen it before, but he did not think too much about it. After all, the structure of the demonic body was strange, and at most, he could roughly infer the type of the opponent's ability. Whoosh! The girl rushed over again. Dean's heart tightened, but he did not panic. His eyes flashed quickly, thinking of a solution. Puff! While he was thinking, the girl succeeded again, tearing a piece of flesh from his body. At this moment, he was like a weak tiger that could only let the falcon peck at it, unable to resist. When the girl rushed over again, Dean suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He put away the sharp blade on his body and covered the surface of his body like a feather. It looked like he was wearing a layer of armor, and his defense was greatly increased. The girl's mouth curved into a grin. She quickly approached, and then quickly changed direction, continuously changing 4 directions. When Dean had no time to react, she suddenly attacked from the front. She believed that Dean had been attacked from the side and back several times in a row, and had long been on guard against these places. Instead, he paid less attention to the front, so he did the opposite. However, when her claws and mouth came close, the sharp blade that was originally covering Dean's body like an armor suddenly opened, like a sudden erection of a sharp thorn, ejecting at an extremely fast speed. Although the girl's speed was fast, she did not expect such a sudden reaction, and this method was also beyond her expectation, so she could not avoid for a while. Puff, puff, puff. Several bone-piercing sounds rang, accompanied by a scream. Dean felt his chest was hit hard, and he could not help but groan. His body flew out upside down, like a cloth bag thrown into the distance. When he hurriedly climbed up, he saw the girl standing 30 meters away. The arm that had been previously cut off and the other arm were all cut off from the elbow. There was also a very deep scratch on her neck, almost cutting off her jade neck. On her face, there were 2 scratches and a bloody hole, and the corner of her mouth was cut open, and blood kept flowing. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. Although he could not kill her, it was not bad to be able to seriously injure her. The girl screamed in pain, and her 8 strange legs violently trampled on the ground, crushing the weeds on the ground. Dean was about to take advantage of the situation to attack, but the screaming girl suddenly stopped, staring at Dean with blood-red eyes, and instantly exuded a murderous aura, which made Dean abruptly stop his body. At this moment, The girl was like a daughter of destiny, exuding a terrifying murderous aura, and just one look made Dean feel danger. He felt that the girl was not a coward, so he hesitated for a moment, but chose to stay still. The girl's ferocious face looked even more terrifying with the blood flowing. Coupled with her protruding teeth, it was as if she wanted to eat people. Just when Dean thought she would attack again, the girl suddenly looked up to the sky and issued a very loud roar. It lasted for a few seconds before stopping. Then she continued to stare at Dean, motionless. The two were deadlocked for a few minutes, and Dean's heart suddenly had a warning sign, thinking that the roar was a call. Thinking of this, he was suddenly scared out of cold sweat, and could not continue to fight. He turned around and ran. He did not escape in the direction of Zaxi and Jason, but ran straight to the location of War God's Wall. After knowing that Dana was not really crazy, he knew that his previous plan had failed, and now the biggest problem was to leave alive. As for Zaxi and Jason, at the moment they were no different than dead people. He directly chose to give up. P.S. Attention Lamakes 666. Chapter 956. Want to run? The girl saw Dean turn around and rush. Although she had a broken leg, she was not slow with the help of the sharp blade limbs and the wings on her back. Her reaction was also not slow. She flew away quickly like a rock spreading its wings. In the blink of an eye, she approached Dean's back. Whoosh! Dean, who was running for his life, suddenly turned around, and the sharp blades shot out like raindrops. The girl's figure flashed. She seemed to have expected it and dodged sideways. Dean saw that the sneak attack failed, but he did not stop. He continued to run forward, but when he turned around, his body shook with the sound of a bell. The girl heard the bell, but she did not care. Seeing Dean running away again, she immediately chased after him. Soon she closed the distance with Dean. Her body suddenly accelerated and got close to Dean's back. Whoosh! The sharp blades on Dean's back were thrown out. The girl's figure flashed, and she went around to the side like a ghost. Her claws stabbed toward a gap between the sharp blades on Dean's side. At this moment, Dean suddenly turned his head and looked at her fiercely. The girl was startled. She did not expect Dean to guess that she would attack this side. At this time, her claws had pierced into Dean's waist. Without waiting for her to stop, Dean suddenly roared and counterattacked. The girl looked at the swarming blades. Her face changed slightly, and she hurriedly retreated. Hiss! An extremely soft but sharp sound suddenly rang out. It came from behind. In the thrilling process of being pushed back by Dudian, the girl was still aware of the sharp sound. Her first reaction was surprise. Did he come so fast? But the next moment, the surprise suddenly turned into a chill. She suddenly thought that if he had rushed over, she should have sensed it in advance. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, she hurriedly turned her head to look, only to see a scarlet body burning with raging flames pouncing towards her. Its pure black pupils and slightly sinister face caused her to turn pale with fright. Wasn't it the Corpse King who was stunned on the side before? Whoosh! Liquid flames spurted out of Aisha's mouth. She covered her face and rushed over, rolling toward the girl's back. At the same time, Aisha's demonized dragon claw was like an iron hook, and it rested on the girl's shoulder. A violent force tightened on the dragon claw, and the girl's body was suddenly pulled. In this moment of delay, Dean had already approached from the front, and his body was like a pear blossom piercing out. "No!" the girl screamed in terror. Pu. Blood splattered everywhere, and the sound of bones being cut rang out continuously. This sound was very pleasing to the ear because the cutting was very fast, and there was no lag. Thump! The ferocious head on the young girl's neck was cut off and fell to the ground. Her face was still incomparably ferocious, but her blood-red eyes gradually dimmed. Dean was about to continue to dismember her body, but the girl's arm suddenly pierced through the gap between the blades, aiming straight at Dean's heart. Dean's pupils shrank as he retreated. The headless girl turned her body and suddenly shot spikes and tentacles from her body. They hit Aisha's chest and pushed her away. Dean's eyes fell on the position of her abdomen. It was as smooth as white scales, but there was a faint outline of a girl's cheek. He had guessed it before, but he didn't expect it to be true. Her brain had been transferred to her body's abdomen during demonization. However, according to her height of about 1.6 meters before demonization, it was indeed in the position of her abdomen at the moment. It was just that during demonization, he only saw her body expand, but he didn't see her head move. Most likely it had been transferred from the body's tissues. The flames were still burning the girl's back. Pieces of carapace-like skin were burned off, and black viscous liquid seeped out from inside, exuding a fishy smell. It was like her blood, but also like rotten water that had settled in a stinky ditch. The black viscous liquid stained the flames, and the liquid flames that were difficult to extinguish gradually extinguished. Roar! Aisha roared and rushed forward again. The outline of the girl's abdomen cheek was clearly highlighted, and her expression became vivid. Previously, she had deliberately concealed this fatal point, but now that the decorative head on her neck had been cut off, this place had been exposed, and she didn't need to hide it anymore. At this moment, seeing Aisha rushing over without fear, her face changed slightly. She glanced at Dean, who was ready to attack, and then looked at Aisha, who had already rushed over. Whoosh! She immediately rushed to the side. However, the previous attack of Dean not only cut off her head, but also cut off her body. It also cut off 3 of her clawed legs. In addition, 2.5 of her strange legs were seriously injured in the previous battle. At this moment, she only had 2 legs that could barely be used, and her running speed was obviously not as fast as before. Aisha roared and chased after her. She opened her mouth and shot out a mouthful of liquid flame. The speed of the flame was faster than her own speed. The girl wanted to change direction quickly, but the only 2 good legs could barely make her fly in a straight line. Even if she turned a corner, her body felt shaky, and she was a little unbalanced. She couldn't adapt for a while. At this moment, she could only watch the liquid flame rushing in front of her. She puffed up her cheeks and spat out a thick black viscous liquid, which offset the liquid flame. Dean didn't let Aisha make a move before because he considered that in case he was defeated by the girl, it would have a miraculous effect when he retreated. After all, the girl should not think that Aisha would be controlled by him. At this moment, letting Aisha make a move, the effect was better than he had imagined. From a disadvantageous situation to an advantageous position in the blink of an eye, the fact was always changeable. He immediately pursued the victory and cooperated with Aisha to attack from both sides. The girl stumbled to the woods not far away. Before she stepped into the woods, she was caught up by Dean and Aisha, one left and one right. You can actually control the Corpse King." The girl saw Aisha's strategic attack. How could she not know that she was controlled by Dean? She noticed that every time the Corpse King was about to make a new move, the bell would ring. The clear, sweet tinkle of the bell. At this moment, in her ears, it was like the bell of death. Roar! Aisha rushed to bite from the right side, her beautiful face full of ferocity. The girl's face changed slightly. She knew what the result of being bitten by the Corpse King was. Even if a pioneer-level Corpse King bit her, it could infect her, not to mention that Aisha was obviously an abyssal-level Corpse King, and her combat power was comparable to the Middle Abyss. She immediately dodged Aisha's attack and waved her claws to parry, but Dean suddenly appeared behind her. His sharp blade was like a knife, and several shadows flashed. The girl couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood and fell forward. On her back, a pair of short wings that had suddenly appeared were cut off. In addition, there were several vertical cracks on her back, deep to the bone, and blood kept flowing. Dean was about to take advantage of the situation to pursue. Suddenly, an extremely fast sound of breaking through the air sounded, as if something was quickly crossing the air, like scratching a piece of silk, making a harsh sound. Dean's face changed greatly, and he hurriedly stopped his body. He saw a strong wind passing in front of his nose. If he continued to move forward 2 inches, most of his nasal bones would have been pierced. Dean spread out his full field of vision perception, and he immediately saw the direction of the strong wind without turning his head. An extremely burly man slowly walked out, with 2 demon-like curved horns on top of his head. His whole body was bronze-colored, and his muscles were strong, full of explosive power. His body was only half demon, roughly no different from a human, but there were strange red patterns on his face, as if magma was flowing in his body, burning and cracking his body. When he turned to look at the heat source, Dean's face suddenly changed. It was as red as blood, incomparably thick, and like the sun in the sky, emitting amazing heat. This heat spread more than 20 meters around his body, like a volcano rising day by day. Lord of the Abyss? Dean's heart slightly trembled. This heat source was much stronger than that of the girl. During the battle, the girl didn't hide her own heat source, but the heat she emitted was less than half of this, and the girl's strength was at the upper abyss. He thought of the previous scream of the girl, but he didn't expect that it was really a call. The person in front of him was their father. After a few seconds, Dean suddenly reacted. Looking at the girl who was rushing towards the strong man, his eyes flashed with killing intent. Suddenly, his speed was comparable to escaping, and he instantly caught up with the girl who only had 2 strange legs left. The sharp blades on his body were like wings, hugging her body from behind. The tip of the sharp blade was in the middle position in front of her, and as long as he used a little force, he could tear her body in half. The girl stopped, and her face was pale. She felt that the wound on her back was still pressed against by a sharp blade. It was Dean's demonized arm, and as long as it lightly pierced through her back, it would directly penetrate her abdomen. Chapter 957. Stop, Dean said in a low voice. The strong man didn't seem to hear Dean's words as he slowly walked forward step by step. There was no expression on his face. Stop! Dean growled, and a sharp blade pierced out from his left shoulder, cutting the girl's cheek. Blood flowed out of the wound. The girl screamed in pain but soon bit her lips so that she wouldn't make a sound. The strong man's expressionless face turned cold as he said in a hoarse voice, "Are you from the Shenluo Empire? Are you her father?" Dean looked at the burly man who stopped, and his heart was slightly relieved, but he was still extremely nervous, but his expression was indifferent and cold, as if he had nothing to fear. "I heard that you are also from the Shenluo Empire. Did you defect and escape?" The strong man looked at him coldly and turned to the girl. He looked at Dean for a moment and said, "Let go of her and I'll let you die a quick death." Dean sneered, "Your 2 daughters are in my hands. If you want them to live, you have to do what I say." At this point, he could only put on the appearance of a kidnapper and take hostages to save his life. The burly man gazed at him in silence. Moments later, he said, "You're deserters from the Empire, right? What do you want to say?" Dean narrowed his eyes. "Even if I let you go, you won't have the ability to survive here. As for returning to the Empire," there was a trace of ridicule on the strong man's indifferent face, "you will suffer a fate worse than death." "Maybe we are the vanguard of the Empire?" Dean smiled. The strong man indifferently said, "Not long ago, the fire dragons gathered magic beasts to attack the god of war wall. The scale of this attack is enough to damage the vitality of the god of war wall. How would they have the energy to send the vanguard to investigate the aliens?" "You seem to know a lot," Dean whispered. "You know that the aliens gathered magic beasts to attack the god of war wall, but you didn't inform in advance. So you are no different from us. You have betrayed the Empire." "Betrayed the Empire?" A cold glint flashed across the muscular man's indifferent eyes. "The Empire betrayed me." Dean was startled. His tone softened as he said, "Since we are on the same side, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Maybe we can cooperate. After all, you won't get any benefits if you kill us, but you will have a few more helpers. The brawny man saw that Dudian intended to make peace. A glimmer flashed in the depths of his eyes, but his expression was still indifferent. Whether you can be my friend or not depends on how much sincerity you have. Dean smiled. Of course I'm sincere. But forgive me for not letting go of your daughter. After all, I don't see your sincerity. The burly man stared at him. What do you think is considered sincere? There is no need for oaths or guarantees. I think we can communicate with each other through letters and secret codes. You leave first and I will release your daughters and let them go back. Then we will meet again next time, Dean said quickly. It seemed that he was prepared for this. The burly man stared at him for a moment and sighed. He whispered, Your little cleverness really makes me a little impatient. Dean was startled. A warning sign rose in his heart. The moment the strong man finished his words, his body suddenly disappeared. To be precise, he disappeared from Dudien's field of vision. He turned into a dark red afterimage and appeared in front of Dudien in a flash. Dean's tense heart jumped in fright. He held the girl's sharp blade and quickly stabbed into the girl's body. He believed that when the burly man attacked him from the side, he and the girl would perish together. At this moment of life and death, this was the only thing he could think of. Puff! Suddenly, a hard object pierced through his chest. The violent force shook his entire body, followed by a cold, tearing sensation and blazing pain at the same time. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the brawny man in front of him. One of his arms had transformed into a giant pincer that pierced through the chest of the girl in front of him, piercing straight through his body, killing two birds with one stone. You! Dean was shocked. At the same time, the shadow of death shrouded over his head. He didn't have time to be in a daze. At this critical moment, his right arm released the demon form and revealed a huge ice claw. He fiercely hammered at the burly man. The burly man was startled. He raised his other arm that wasn't demonized to block. Bang! The ground shook slightly and the force of the impact spread out. The strong man's body slightly swayed and leaned back more than 10 degrees, while Dean's body suddenly retreated. The giant pincer, stained with blood, separated from his chest, and blood sprayed everywhere. With the recoil force, Dean retreated to Aisha's side. He looked at the burly man whose arm was unscathed. His heart was shocked and cold at the same time. It must be known that the power of his ice claw was 10 times that of his left hand. It was comparable to the full blow of the upper abyss. However, the burly man didn't demonize and only relied on his human body to resist. Was this the power of the Lord of the Abyss? Or was it a stronger existence? Dad! The girl looked at the burly man who was hugging her. Her voice was weak, and she called out reluctantly. The strong man undid the demonization of his arm. When the giant pincer returned to its original form, it looked extremely slender. He pulled it back from her broken chest, and there was a trace of gentleness on his cold face. He said softly, I hurt you. Wait for me here. As he said that, he used the hand that had pierced through her chest and was stained with blood to stroke her hair. His face was filled with love. The girl squeezed out a smile. She wanted to say something but coughed up a mouthful of blood. The burly man slowly put her body on the ground. He looked up at Dean in front of him. The tenderness in his eyes had long disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by cold killing intent. However, when his eyes fell on Dean's huge ice right arm, he was obviously startled. The killing intent in his eyes also converged a lot. He slightly frowned. Dean's eyes were gloomy. He didn't take the opportunity to escape. He knew that with his leg strength, he couldn't outrun the burly man. It would only be a waste of his physical strength. He thought about how to escape, but after thinking about it, he still couldn't come up with any hope. Was this the end of her life? He didn't feel too sad in his heart. He was just a little unwilling, a little regretful, and a little relieved. He had experienced so many times on the edge of life and death that he was already numb to this kind of feeling. The biggest regret was that he couldn't resurrect Aisha. This debt could only last until the next life, if there was a reincarnation in this world. You're smart not to escape. The burly man slowly walked toward Dean step by step. He said slowly, "Where is Dana? She's the first girl you caught." "Dead," Dean said expressionlessly. He didn't try to use Dana's life to make a deal. From the moment the burly man pierced through the girl's chest without hesitation, Dean knew that the status of his 2 daughters in the burly man's mind might not be so high that he would make mistakes and take risks. "Do you want to die?" The burly man walked in front of Dean and looked down at him. Dean saw the distance between them, and his gray heart germinated a glimmer of hope. He was still expressionless. "Since I've fallen into your hands, I have nothing to say. I've killed people, and I'm ready to be killed." "You're open-minded." The burly man slowly took 2 steps forward. "But death isn't the most terrible thing. What do you want?" Dean looked up at him. "Torture? Abuse? Or get information about the Empire from my mouth? If you have these hobbies, I can satisfy you. As for the Empire, I don't mind telling you what you want to know. After all, I'm also a rebel." Chapter 958. Whoosh. 2 sharp blades suddenly attacked the brawny man from the side. Dean was confident that he could cut the brawny man in half at such a close distance. The speed of the blades was so fast that he couldn't see them clearly. Clang! Clang! The 2 sharp sounds made Dean's eyelids jump. He saw that the 2 blades that the brawny man thrust out were pinched by the brawny man. His palms were covered with tortoise-shell-like armor. There were complex patterns on them, as if he was wearing a layer of mechanical glove. Blood overflowed from the brawny man's palms and slid down the blades. Time seemed to stand still at this moment. The brawny man looked down at Dean with an expressionless face. He suddenly twisted his palm, and with 2 snapping sounds, Dean's 2 blade-like limbs were broken. Thick black blood oozed out from the broken blade. "Is this your resistance?" The brawny man quietly looked at Dean. Dean's heart sank to the bottom. He believed that the brawny man wouldn't be able to react even if he was the Lord of the Abyss if he was caught off guard and they were so close to each other. But now he reacted. Not only did he demonize his palms at the critical moment, but he also caught the sharp blade. It could only mean that the brawny man was prepared. Or his strength was greater than the Lord of the Abyss. Silence. There was a deathly silence. The brawny man looked at Dean, who was silent as if his strength had been drained. He said indifferently, "Take me to Dana. I can leave your corpse intact or let you die a quick death." His tone was like an order. It seemed that he knew Dean wouldn't refuse. Dean didn't refuse. It seemed that no one could refuse in the face of absolute strength. "Come with me." Dean was silent for a moment and slowly turned around. He wasn't worried about exposing his back to the brawny man. It would be easy for the brawny man to kill him with the strength shown by the brawny man. The burly man turned around and picked up the girl who was lying on the ground. His actions were gentle, and his cold eyes revealed a hint of gentleness. No one would believe that the girl in his arms was injured by him. Dean also picked up Aisha. He used the bell to let her release the demonization and return to the corpse puppet state. Then he led the way. The 2 of them walked along the plains and through the forest, their feet rustling in the mud and grass. They were silent along the way, as if they were a group of travelers. "Your right arm was caused by ice crystals?" The muscular man was the first to speak. "How did you come to the Battle God Wall? Did you come here directly from the Divine Wall?" Dean was expressionless. "Why can't they come from the Empire?" The burly man chuckled, seemingly in a good mood. "If the people of the Empire saw your right arm, you would have become a mouse in their hands. This is a taboo, don't you know?" "Taboo?" Dudian was startled. He didn't expect that his right arm would be a taboo of the Empire. However, he didn't think that the burly man would lie to him. With the latter's strength, it was impossible for him to stay in the godly wall without being noticed. In all likelihood, he was a high-ranking member of the Empire and knew more than him. There was no need for him to lie to him. He thought of the dragon mother of the demon-hunting dragon clan, who turned her whole body into ice, and of the Vatican secretly capturing patients with the ice blood disease. He said, "What's so scary about that? At most, I'll just turn my whole body into ice. Although it's the power of self-destruction, it's not a taboo, right?" The burly man laughed. "It's not unusual for the whole body to be frozen. But it's rare for a part of your body to be frozen. It hasn't happened before." "What's the difference?" Dean's eyes moved. He noticed that the reason why the burly man didn't kill him was not because he wanted to lead the way but because he was interested in his right arm. "The difference is bigger than you think." The burly man chuckled and said, "Most people who are infected with the poison of the frigid ice crystal will start from a point, and then use this point as the core to spread to the whole body. In other words, before the poison spreads, it will be like you, only a part of the body will be frozen. But the speed of the spread is very fast. Especially when the body is frozen, the blood will flow through the whole body and the whole body will be frozen. But there doesn't seem to be any signs of spreading. How did you do it?" Dean's eyes lit up. "Maybe I'm lucky. It's not something that can be explained by luck," the burly man said meaningfully. Dean was silent and didn't speak again. The burly man didn't ask again. It seemed that they were just casually chatting. After a moment, Dean came to the place where they were going to stay tonight. He felt the smell of Jason and Zasha's disguise. He slightly frowned as he slowly went up the mountain with the burly man. Halfway through, the brawny man's figure suddenly moved. He swept away from Dean's side like a gust of wind and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The next moment, 2 screams came from the top of the mountain. Dean was silent. He had seen through the heat source that Jason and Zaxite were aware of his return when he went up the mountain. Moreover, they were aware of the abnormality and fled in different directions. He deliberately chose to walk slowly to give them time to escape. But he didn't expect that the burly man was also aware of it. The two didn't escape far before they were caught by the burly man and thrown to Dana's side. He tightened his fingers as he slowly led Aisha up the mountain. He didn't take the opportunity to escape. With the burly man's speed, he estimated that he would be caught before he reached the foot of the mountain. Moreover, he knew what the burly man would see when he went up the mountain. So he didn't want to make an unnecessary struggle and anger the burly man. When he reached the top of the mountain, he saw Jason and Zash lying on the ground. They were groaning in pain. Their legs were broken and bent at a terrible angle. The bones inside were protruding out of the skin. Blood was dripping from the broken bones. Not far away from the two of them, the brawny man stood tall like a black tower. His entire body emanated a terrifying murderous aura. His back was facing him, and his head was lowered. In front of him was Dinah, who was lying on the grass. Dinah, who only had her upper body and no hands left. From far away, Dean could feel the terrifying murderous aura exuding from the brawny man's body. It was horrifying, and the pores of his whole body felt a chill like a thorn. "Dean, you bastard! I'm going to kill you!" Jason and Zash couldn't help but roar as they saw Dean climbing up the mountain. "You betrayed us! You will die! Even if I die, I will curse you!" Their faces were ferocious, and their eyes were full of resentment as they stared at Dean. They wished they could swallow Dean alive. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.